The sound of gunfire echoed through the dusty streets of Sweetwater, Texas, shattering the peaceful afternoon of May 1875. Townsfolk scattered like startled birds, diving behind water troughs and ducking into doorways as bullets splintered wood and shattered glass windows. Inside the Sweetwater Bank and Trust, Jasper Whitfield's eyes glittered with malice as he pressed the cold barrel of his revolver against the banker's temple. His dark hair hung in greasy strands beneath a battered black hat, and 3 days' worth of stubble darkened his jaw. "Fill the bag," he growled, shoving a canvas sack toward the trembling banker. "Every last dollar." Outside, Sheriff Daniel Thornton crouched behind an overturned wagon, his weathered face set with determination. At 53, he'd seen his share of desperados, but the Whitfield gang had terrorized 3 counties over the past 6 months. "They're cornered now," he muttered to the hastily assembled group of shopkeepers and ranchers who'd answered his call. "Wait for my signal." When Jasper and his 4 companions burst through the bank doors, saddlebags heavy with stolen cash, the street erupted in gunfire. 2 outlaws fell immediately. Another made it to his horse before a bullet found his back. The 4th surrendered, hands thrust skyward. But Jasper Whitfield fought like a cornered wolf. He fired wildly, bullets kicking up dust and forcing the townspeople to duck for cover. When his revolver clicked empty, he drew a second from his belt. Noah Sullivan, who had ridden into town that morning for supplies, watched from the shadow of the general store. His hand moved to the rifle slung across his saddle. With the calm precision of a man who'd spent his life on the frontier, he raised the weapon, exhaled slowly, and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked across the street. Jasper staggered, a look of surprise crossing his face before he crumpled to the dirt. As the dust settled, Sheriff Thornton approached the fallen outlaw, nudging him with a boot to confirm he was dead. When he knelt to search the body, he found something unexpected in Jasper's breast pocket, a neatly folded letter on pale blue stationery. "What's this?" the sheriff muttered, unfolding the paper. His eyebrows rose as he read. "Well, I'll be damned." The letter was signed by a Clara Bennett of Philadelphia, confirming her arrival date in Sweetwater as Jasper's mail-order bride. "Looks like somebody's in for a disappointment," the sheriff said, glancing at the date. "She's due on tomorrow's train." From the shadows, Noah Sullivan watched silently. He'd only fired because the sheriff had been in Jasper's sights. Yet as he turned his horse toward home, an unfamiliar weight settled in his chest. He'd killed men before. It was sometimes necessary in the wildlands of Texas, but never one who had a woman traveling across the country to marry him. Clara Bennett pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the train window, watching as the wild expanse of Texas rolled past. The gentle weight of her daughter Lily sleeping in her arms provided her only comfort on this journey into the unknown. At 26, Clara's face still held the soft beauty of youth, though grief had etched fine lines around her blue eyes. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a practical bun, with a few strands escaping to frame her face. She wore her best traveling dress, a somber navy blue that had been carefully mended and pressed for this journey. The past 6 years had taught Clara that life rarely followed the paths one expected. She had never imagined she would become a nurse during the bloodiest war in American history, nor that she would watch her husband Thomas waste away from wounds that never properly healed. And she certainly never imagined she would find comfort in the arms of Thomas's brother James during those dark days, a comfort that resulted in little Lily after Thomas had been buried for 3 months. Philadelphia had become impossible after that. The whispers, the stares, the loss of her nursing position when her pregnancy became visible, the Bennett family's rejection when they realized the timing of the child's conception. "It's just you and me now, little one," she whispered to her sleeping daughter, brushing a finger across the child's downy hair. A fresh start. Her letter correspondence with Jasper Whitfield had begun 6 months ago. He described himself as a successful businessman in Sweetwater, looking for a respectable wife. Clara had been honest about Lily claiming her as her late husband's child, a small deception that pained her conscience but seemed necessary. Jasper had been surprisingly accepting, writing that a child would make their home complete from the start. The train whistle shrieked, startling Lily awake. As Clara soothed her daughter, an older woman across the aisle smiled sympathetically. "First time to Texas, dear?" Clara nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Where are you headed?" "Sweetwater. My fiancé is meeting me there." The woman's smile widened. "How wonderful! Sweetwater's a growing town. My sister lives there." Decent folk for the most part. Clara tried to return the smile, but anxiety knotted her stomach. What if Jasper didn't like her? What if he changed his mind about Lily? What if this was all a terrible mistake? As the train began to slow, Clara gathered her meager belongings, one trunk containing all that remained of her life in Philadelphia. Lily fussed in her arms, sensing her mother's tension. "Almost there, sweet girl," Clara murmured. "Almost home." But when she stepped down onto the platform, scanning the faces of those waiting, confusion settled over her. No one approached. No one called her name. A tall man in a dusty sheriff's uniform finally stepped forward, removing his hat. "Miss Bennett," Clara clutched Lily tighter. "Yes. I'm Sheriff Thornton. I'm afraid I have some difficult news." The world seemed to tilt beneath Clara's feet as Sheriff Thornton explained in a low voice that Jasper Whitfield had been killed the previous day during an attempted bank robbery, that he'd been a wanted man in 2 states, that the business he'd claimed to own was nothing more than a series of confidence schemes and thefts. "I'm truly sorry, ma'am," the sheriff concluded. "It seems you've come all this way for nothing." Clara stood frozen, unable to process this sudden, devastating shift in her circumstances. Lily began to cry, perhaps sensing her mother's distress, and the plaintive sound finally broke through Clara's shock. Lee, I don't understand," she managed. "The letters. He seemed—" "Jasper Whitfield was good at seeming to be many things, Miss Bennett. None of them true." The sheriff looked genuinely sympathetic. "Do you have family you can return to?" Clara shook her head numbly. The $20 hidden in her boot would barely buy food for the coming days, let alone train fare back to Philadelphia. And even if she could return, what awaited her there but shame and rejection? A small crowd had gathered, watching the exchange with curious eyes. Clara could already see the whispers starting, the sideways glances, the judgment beginning to form. "Sheriff Thornton." A stern female voice cut through the murmurs. A tall, thin woman with iron gray hair, pulled severely back, approached her, expression pinched with disapproval. "Is this her Whitfield's woman?" The sheriff sighed. "Eleanor, this is Miss Bennett." She had no idea about Whitfield's activities. Eleanor Thornton, the sheriff's wife, narrowed her eyes. "I'm sure she didn't," she said in a tone that implied exactly the opposite. Her gaze lingered on Lily. "And I suppose that's his child." "No," Clara said, finding her voice at last. "My daughter is from my late husband." Mrs. Thornton's lips pressed into a thin line of disbelief. "Well, Sheriff, what do you intend to do with them? They can't stay at our house. What would people think?" An elderly man in a minister's collar stepped forward. "Now, Eleanor Shirley, Christian Charity." "I've no objection to charity, Reverend Bailey," Mrs. Thornton interrupted. "But there's the Women's Aid Society to consider. Things must be done properly. Forms filled out. References checked. We can't just take in every unfortunate who steps off the train." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. She'd faced prejudice before, but never so openly, never while already reeling from such a shock. "I don't require charity, ma'am," she said, straightening her spine. "I'm a trained nurse. I can work." "A nurse?" Mrs. Thornton scoffed. "Sweetwater has Doc Miller. And who would care for your child while you worked?" Clara opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. The enormity of her situation crashed over her like a wave. She was alone in a strange town with no money, no connections, and a baby to care for. The careful plans she'd built over months of correspondence had crumbled to dust in minutes. "I believe I might have a solution." The deep voice came from behind Clara. She turned to see a tall man dismounting from a chestnut horse. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out a strong jaw covered with a neatly trimmed beard and eyes the color of a summer sky. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, despite the trail dust covering his clothes. "Sullivan," Sheriff Thornton acknowledged with a nod. "What brings you to town?" "Supplies," the man said simply, then turned his attention to Clara. "Noah Sullivan, ma'am. I own the Starlight Ranch about 7 miles east." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with early threads of silver at the temples. "I couldn't help overhearing your predicament." "Mr. Sullivan is one of our most established ranchers," Sheriff Thornton explained to Clara. There was something in his tone, respect, but also caution. My housekeeper left last month to care for her ailing mother in San Antonio, Noah continued. I've got 20 ranch hands eating poorly and a house gathering dust. If you're handy in a kitchen and don't mind hard work, I could use someone like you. Clara stared at him, trying to assess if this unexpected offer was genuine or something more sinister. There was nothing in his expression but straightforward practicality. Mrs. Thornton made a sound of disapproval. Really, Mr. Sullivan? A single woman at your ranch with all those men, it's hardly proper. Joe Parker's wife will be there as chaperone, Noah replied evenly, and Miss Bennett would have her own cabin near the main house. Joe Parker's wife has been dead 3 years, Mrs. Thornton countered. A flicker of something, irritation or perhaps sorrow, crossed Noah's face. Joe himself, then. He's 70 if he's a day, and more proper than half the town combined. Clara's mind raced. The offer seemed too convenient, too perfectly timed. Yet what choice did she have? Sleep at the train station with Lily Begg in the streets. Mr. Sullivan, she said carefully, your offer is very kind, but we're strangers to each other. Why would you help me? For a moment, Noah's confident demeanor faltered. Something haunted passed behind his eyes, quickly masked. My mother always said true character is revealed by how we treat those who can offer us nothing in return, he said quietly. Then with a hint of a smile he added, besides Miss Bennett, you should taste Joe's biscuits. Helping you might be saving my men from starvation. Despite everything, Clara found herself returning his smile. There was something solid about Noah Sullivan, a steadiness that felt like ground beneath her feet when everything else was shifting sand. I accept your offer, Mr. Sullivan, she said. Thank you. Now wait just a minute, Mrs. Thornton began, but her husband laid a gentle hand on her arm. Eleanor, he said softly, it's the girl's decision. Reverend Bailey stepped forward. Miss Bennett, if you have any concerns, the church can help find alternative arrangements. Clara looked at the elderly minister's kind face, then back at Noah Sullivan. Her instincts, honed by years of making quick decisions in chaotic field hospitals, told her to trust this stranger. I appreciate that, Reverend, but I believe Mr. Sullivan's offer is my best option. She shifted Lily to her other arm. If I might retrieve my trunk. Noah nodded and moved to help the station master with her luggage. As he did, Clara noticed Mrs. Thornton lean close to the sheriff, whispering urgently. The older woman's disapproving gaze made it clear what she thought of the arrangement. Don't mind Eleanor, Reverend Bailey said softly beside her. She means well but sees the world in very particular ways. Will I have trouble here, Reverend? Clara asked quietly. Because of how I arrived. The old minister's eyes crinkled with compassion. There may be some who judge hastily, my dear, but many more who will open their hearts if given the chance. He paused. Noah Sullivan is a good man, reserved, sometimes difficult, but honorable to his core. Clara nodded, taking comfort in the assessment. Thank you, Reverend. Noah returned with her trunk loaded onto his wagon. He helped Clara up onto the seat, careful of the baby in her arms, then climbed up beside her. With a nod to the sheriff and the Reverend, he flicked the reins and the wagon began to move away from the station. Clara felt the stares of the townspeople following them, but kept her gaze forward. She'd come to Texas seeking a fresh start. It wasn't beginning the way she'd planned, but perhaps this unexpected turn was where her path was meant to lead all along. As they left the town behind, Lily finally settled, lulled by the steady rocking of the wagon. The vast Texas landscape opened around them. Rolling hills dotted with mesquite trees and carpeted with spring wildflowers that painted the earth in swaths of blue, yellow, and crimson. It's beautiful, Clara murmured almost to herself. Noah glanced at her. It grows on you, he said. First time I saw it, I thought it was the loneliest place on earth. And now, a hint of a smile touched his lips. Now I can't imagine being anywhere else. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon wheels and the distant call of meadowlarks. Clara stole glances at her companion, trying to read the man who had so unexpectedly altered her fate. Noah Sullivan had the weathered look of someone who spent most of his life outdoors. His hands on the reins were strong and calloused, marked with the small scars that came from years of ranch work. There was a quietness about him that spoke not of shyness, but of a man comfortable with silence. Mr. Sullivan, Clara ventured at last, I'm grateful for your offer, but I confess it seems unusually fortunate. Did you come to town specifically looking for help? Noah kept his eyes on the road. No, ma'am, I come to town every 2 weeks for supplies. Then why offer a position to a complete stranger? Surely there must be women in Sweetwater seeking work. He was quiet for so long that Clara thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured. Few women are willing to live so far from town. Those who might be are spoken for. He glanced at her. And fewer still would welcome a child at a working ranch. There was something he wasn't saying, Clara sensed. Some deeper reason. But she didn't press. They were strangers after all, and she was entirely dependent on his goodwill. I should tell you about my expectations, Noah continued. The position includes room and board plus $15 a month. Hours are long, breakfast for the hands at dawn, dinner after dusk, with the house to manage between. Sundays are yours to do as you please. That's generous, Clara said, surprised by the wage. It was more than she'd earned as a nurse in Philadelphia. It's fair, Noah corrected. I don't believe in paying less than work is worth. The wagon topped a small rise and Clara gasped softly. Below them, nestled in a gentle valley, lay the Starlight Ranch. The main house was a substantial 2-story structure of whitewashed wood with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. A large barn stood nearby, along with several smaller outbuildings and a bunkhouse. In the distance, cattle grazed on green pastures and horses moved in a fenced corral. Home, Noah said simply. As they approached, an elderly man emerged from the barn, shading his eyes against the afternoon sun. Despite his obvious age, he stood straight as a ramrod, his white hair and beard neatly trimmed. That's Joe Parker, Noah explained. He's been with the ranch since before I was born. Runs things when I'm away. Joe watched their approach with obvious curiosity. When Noah halted the wagon in front of the main house, the old man stepped forward. Didn't expect you back so soon, he said, his weathered face breaking into a smile as he spotted Clara and Lily. And with company, no less. Joe, this is Miss Clara Bennett and her daughter Lily, Noah said, helping Clara down from the wagon. Miss Bennett will be taking over as housekeeper. If Joe was surprised by this announcement, he hid it well. He tipped his hat respectfully. Ma'am, little miss, it'll be a pleasure having you both at Starlight. Thank you, Mr. Parker, Clara replied, finding herself warming to the old man's kind eyes and gentle manner. Just Joe, ma'am. Everyone calls me Joe. He turned to Noah. I've had the boys air out the old foreman's cabin. It's small, but it's clean. Noah nodded. Good. Help Miss Bennett get settled while I unload the supplies. As Noah led the horses toward the barn, Joe picked up Clara's trunk with surprising strength for his age. This way, ma'am, it's not far. The foreman's cabin stood about 50 yards from the main house, a simple one-room structure with a small porch. Inside, Clara found it basic but clean, with a bed, a table with 2 chairs, a small stove, and a rocking chair by the window. A curtain partitioned off one corner where a copper tub stood. It's not much, Joe said apologetically, setting down her trunk. It's perfect, Clara assured him, and meant it. After months in boarding houses and cramped train compartments, the small cabin felt like a palace. Might there be a crib for Lily? Joe's face brightened. As a matter of fact, there is, in the attic of the main house. Used it for my own young'uns years back. I'll have one of the boys bring it over directly. Clara set Lily on the bed, where the baby immediately began exploring the quilt with curious fingers. Mr. Parker, Joe, may I ask a personal question? Ask away, ma'am. Mrs. Thornton mentioned your wife had passed. I'm sorry for your loss. Joe's expression softened with old grief. My Martha's been gone 3 years now. Pneumonia took her winter of '72. I understand Mrs. Thornton was concerned about propriety with my staying here. Will my presence cause problems for Mr. Sullivan? The old man considered this, stroking his beard thoughtfully. Folks in town talk. It's what they do when there ain't much else for entertainment. His eyes twinkled suddenly. But out here, we don't much care what they say in town. The boss is a private man, keeps to himself mostly. Your being here won't change that. Clara nodded, relieved. The last thing she wanted was to bring scandal to the man who had rescued her from an impossible situation. One more thing, if I may, she said. Mr. Sullivan, he seems to carry a sadness. Is it presumptuous to ask why? Joe's expression grew serious. It ain't my story to tell, ma'am. But yes, the boss has had his share of sorrows. He's a good man, though. Best I've ever known. You and the little one will be safe here. Before Clara could ask more, a knock came at the door. A young ranch hand stood outside with the wooden crib clearly old but solidly built. Mr. Parker asked me to bring this over, ma'am, the boy said, looking barely old enough to shave. Where would you like it? Clara directed him to place it near the bed, thanking him warmly. The boy blushed to the roots of his sandy hair before fleeing back to the bunkhouse. That's Tommy, Joe chuckled. 17 and scared to death of womenfolk. He'll get over it. He moved toward the door. I'll leave you to settle in. Supper's at 6 in the main house. The boss usually eats with me in the kitchen unless he's got business in town. After Joe left, Clara unpacked her few belongings, arranging them carefully in the small space. She changed Lily and fed her, then sat in the rocking chair by the window, holding her drowsy daughter, and looking out at the vast Texas landscape. For the first time since stepping off the train, Clara allowed herself to feel the full weight of the day's events. Jasper Whitfield, the man she'd pinned her hopes on the future she'd imagined, had been an outlaw, a thief. He was dead. And she was here in a stranger's home, dependent on his charity. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She hadn't survived war, widowhood, and disgrace by surrendering to self-pity. This was simply another challenge to overcome, another unexpected turn in the road. Lily stirred in her arms, and Clara looked down at her daughter's peaceful face. For this child, she would endure anything, build anything, become anything. We'll be all right, sweet girl, she whispered, kissing Lily's forehead. Somehow we'll be all right. Noah Sullivan stood in the shadow of the barn, watching as golden evening light bathed the landscape. From this vantage point, he could see Clara Bennett's small figure moving about the foreman's cabin, silhouetted in the window. What had possessed him to bring a stranger, a woman no less, to his ranch? The practical reasons he'd given her were true enough, but not the whole truth. Not by half. He'd recognized her the moment he saw her on that platform. Not her face, which he'd never seen before, but her situation. A woman alone vulnerable, judged by people who knew nothing of her circumstances. It had stirred memories he'd spent years trying to bury. Noah turned away, walking toward the small, fenced cemetery on a rise behind the main house. 3 simple wooden crosses stood within his father, his mother, and the third, smaller, newer, marking a grave that contained no body. He knelt before this last marker, removing his hat as he traced the carved name with calloused fingers, Rachel Sullivan. I brought someone home today, Rach, he said softly to the empty grave. A woman and her child. She needed help. He paused, feeling foolish, as always when speaking to a sister who wasn't there yet, unable to break the habit. She reminds me of you, not in looks, but in spirit, strong even when she's afraid. The setting sun cast long shadows across the small cemetery. Noah remained kneeling for several minutes, lost in memories. He didn't speak again. There was no need. Rachel knew his heart in life and in death. Finally, he rose, dusting off his knees and replacing his hat. As he turned back toward the house, he saw Clara emerging from her cabin, making her way to the main house for dinner. She'd changed into a simple gray dress, her hair freshly arranged, the baby balanced on one hip. Noah waited until she reached the porch before approaching. Miss Bennett, he greeted her. I trust the cabin meets your needs. More than adequately, Mr. Sullivan, she replied. Thank you. Up close in the fading light, Noah could better appreciate Clara Bennett's quiet beauty. She wasn't a conventional beauty like Rachel had been with her golden curls and laughing eyes. Clara's was a more subtle loveliness, gentle curves of cheek and jaw, expressive blue eyes that seemed to take in everything, and a mouth that looked as though it might once have smiled easily before life taught it caution. The baby seems content, he observed, nodding toward Lily, who was examining a loose thread on her mother's collar with intense concentration. Lily adapts well, Clara said, a note of pride in her voice. She's been through a lot of changes in her short life. Noah hesitated, then said, I want to be clear about something, Miss Bennett. Your presence here, it's a business arrangement. You need work. I need a housekeeper. Nothing more is expected of you. Clara's cheeks colored slightly, but she met his gaze directly. I never thought otherwise, Mr. Sullivan. Noah nodded, relieved. Good. I wouldn't want there to be any misunderstandings. They entered the house together, moving through a spacious parlor furnished with simple but well-crafted pieces. The kitchen at the back of the house was large and warm, centered around a massive cast-iron stove. Joe was already there, setting plates on a wooden table big enough for six. "Just in time," the old man said cheerfully. "Hope you like beef stew, Miss Bennett. It's about all I can manage without burning the place down." The meal was simple but hearty: stew cornbread and stewed apples for dessert. Conversation flowed more easily than Noah had expected, largely due to Joe's gift for storytelling. He regaled Clara with tales of the early days of the ranch, careful to include amusing anecdotes that made her smile without straying into painful territory. Noah found himself watching Clara more than participating in the conversation. She ate hungrily, but neatly managing to juggle her own meal while feeding small bites to Lily. The child was remarkably well-behaved, cooing and babbling, but rarely fussing. "If you don't mind my asking," Clara said during a lull, "how many hands work the ranch?" 20 regular, Noah answered, sometimes more during roundup or cattle drives. "And they all take meals together?" Noah nodded. "Breakfast at dawn, dinner at dusk. Cookie handles lunch out on the range most days." "Cookie, Chuck Wagon Cook," Joe explained. "Handles George, but nobody's called him that in 20 years. Clara seemed to be mentally calculating. "So I'll be cooking for 22 men, plus us." "That'll be your main duty," Noah confirmed, "along with keeping the house in order. If it's too much—" "It's not," Clara interrupted. "I've managed larger operations. During the war, I helped feed a field hospital with the over 50 patients, plus staff." "You were a nurse in the war?" Joe asked, clearly impressed. Clara nodded. "For the Union. My husband was wounded at Gettysburg. I followed him to the hospital and ended up staying." Noah studied her with new interest. The war had ended a decade ago, which meant she'd been little more than a girl when she served. "That couldn't have been easy," he said quietly. "It wasn't," Claire acknowledged, her eyes momentarily distant with memories. "But it taught me a great deal. About medicine, yes, but more about people, how they face pain, how they find courage." The conversation moved to other topics, but Noah found himself reassessing Clara Bennett. He'd offered her the position out of a sense of obligation, a need to right a cosmic wrong that had nothing to do with her. But perhaps she would be a genuine asset to Starlight, bringing skills and experiences he hadn't anticipated. After dinner, as Clara prepared to return to her cabin with a sleepy Lily, Noah cleared his throat. "Miss Bennett, there's one more thing I should mention." She paused at the door, looking back at him with a questioning gaze. "The truth about Jasper Whitfield will get around town. People may make assumptions about your relationship with him." Clara's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm familiar with people's assumptions, Mr. Sullivan. What I mean to say is, it might be easier if you don't go into town for a while. Let the gossip die down first." She considered this, then nodded. "That's probably wise, though Lily and I will need a few things. I wasn't precisely prepared for this change in circumstances." "Make a list," Noah said. "I'll send Tommy into town tomorrow." "Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "For everything, Mr. Sullivan. I don't know what would have become of us if you hadn't appeared when you did." The simple gratitude in her voice made Noah uncomfortable. He didn't deserve thanks for doing what any decent man would do, what he should have done years ago when it might have mattered. "Get some rest, Miss Bennett," he said gruffly. "Tomorrow will be a long day." After she left, Noah sat alone at the kitchen table, turning a coffee cup in his hands. Joe had tactfully withdrawn to his room off the kitchen, leaving Noah to his thoughts. He shouldn't have brought her here. It was too close to home, too raw. The moment he'd seen her on that platform holding her child, something had broken loose at Tate and behind him, a dam holding back memories he'd spent years trying to contain. Yet what choice did he have? Leave her to Eleanor Thornton's cold charity? Let her face the cruel judgments of a town that knew nothing of her true circumstances? No. Whatever his personal discomfort, he'd done the right thing. Clara Bennett and her child would have a safe place at Starlight for as long as they needed it. He would keep his distance, maintain the proper relationship between employer and employee, and in time perhaps the echoes of the past would fade again. Rising from the table, Noah moved to the window, gazing out at the moonlit landscape. In the distance, he could see the small light burning in Clara's cabin. A strange feeling swept through him. Not quite peace, but something adjacent to it, as if for the first time in years the world had shifted back into its proper alignment. Shaking off the fanciful thought, Noah extinguished the kitchen lamp and headed upstairs to his own solitary room. Tomorrow would indeed be a long day, and the cattle wouldn't wait for him to sort through ghosts and regrets. Clara woke before dawn, roused by Lily's hungry cries. As she nursed her daughter in the dim light of early morning, she studied their new home with fresh eyes. The cabin was simple but solid, built to withstand the Texas weather. Someone had taken care with small touches. Curtains at the windows, a braided rug beside the bed, a shelf for books she didn't own. After changing Lily and dressing them both, Clara made her way to the main house. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, painting the clouds in shades of pink and gold. The air held the crisp freshness of morning, carrying the sense of sage and cedar. The kitchen door was unlocked. Inside, she found the stove, already lit, a pot of coffee bubbling on the back burner. Joe sat at the table, his gnarled hands wrapped around a steaming cup. "Morning, ma'am," he greeted her, rising politely. "You're up early." "Lily keeps farmer's hours," Clara replied with a smile, settling the baby on her hip. "I hope you don't mind my coming in. This is your domain now," Joe said, gesturing around the kitchen. "I've laid out what we usually make for breakfast. Biscuits, bacon, eggs, when the hens are cooperative, sometimes flapjacks on Sundays." Clara surveyed the supplies: flour, lard, a slab of bacon, a basket of eggs. "This seems straightforward enough. How many biscuits do 20 hungry ranch hands eat?" Joe chuckled. "More than you'd think possible, ma'am. I usually make 4 dozen and there's rarely any left." Clara set Lily on a blanket in the corner with a wooden spoon to play with, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. She'd always found comfort in the rhythms of cooking, the measuring, mixing, the transformation of simple ingredients into something nourishing. It centered her, especially in times of uncertainty. By the time the ranch hands began filing in an hour later, the kitchen was filled with the aromas of fresh biscuits, crisp bacon, and strong coffee. Clara had found jars of preserves in the pantry, peach and blackberry, and set these out alongside a crock of butter. The men entered cautiously, clearly surprised to find a woman and baby in their kitchen. They were a diverse group, young and old, tall and short, their faces bearing the weathered look of those who worked outdoors in all seasons. They removed their hats, nodded respectfully to Clara, and took their places at the long tables set up in the adjoining room. Noah was one of the last to enter, having already been out checking the herd since before dawn. He paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. Clara efficiently serving up plates, Joe bouncing Lily on his knee, the men eating with appreciative murmurs. "Morning, Butters," Joe called. "Miss Bennett's got a real talent in the kitchen." Noah approached, accepting the plate Clara handed him with a nod of thanks. "Everything going smoothly?" "Yes, sir," Clara replied. She looked tired but satisfied, a light flush on her cheeks from the heat of the stove. "Is there anything special you'd like prepared for dinner?" "Whatever you decide is fine," Noah said. "Joe can show you what we have in the smokehouse and garden." He joined his men at the table, aware of their curious glances between him and Clara. There would be speculation, he knew. Questions about where she'd come from and why she was here. He'd need to address that, set the boundaries firmly. After breakfast, when the hands had gone out to their daily tasks, Noah pulled Joe aside. "Make sure the men understand Miss Bennett's position here. She's an employee entitled to the same respect as any other." Joe nodded, a knowing look in his old eyes. "Already took care of it, boss. Told him she's a war widow down on her luck. Said any man who treats her with less than perfect courtesy answers to me." He paused. "And then to you." Noah clapped the old man on the shoulder. "Thank you, Joe." "She's a good one," Joe said quietly. "Reminds me a bit of your ma. Same kind of backbone." The comparison unsettled Noah more than he cared to admit. "Just make sure she has what she needs. I'll be checking the south pasture today." As he left the house, Noah glanced back to see Clara at the kitchen window watching him. When their eyes met, she gave a small nod as if confirming some private thought. Noah touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement before mounting his horse and riding away. The familiar work of the ranch should have cleared his mind, but throughout the day Noah found his thoughts returning to Clara Bennett, her quiet dignity in the face of disaster, the gentle way she handled her daughter, the fact that she'd chosen to become a nurse in the midst of war, facing blood and death, when most women would have fled. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Noah made his way back to the ranch house. He'd just stabled his horse when he spotted Clara hanging laundry behind the main house, sheets and towels billowing in the late afternoon breeze. She worked with efficient grace, seemingly untroubled by the domestic task after years of more sophisticated work. Lily sat nearby in a wooden box Joe had apparently converted into a makeshift playpen, happily stacking small blocks of wood. Noah intended to pass by without disturbing them, but Lily spotted him and let out a delighted gurgle, waving a block in his direction. Clara turned, shading her eyes against the sun. "Mr. Sullivan," she greeted him, "I hope you found everything in order today." "More than in order," he replied, approaching cautiously. "Joe tells me the men were quite impressed with breakfast." A small, pleased smile touched Clara's lips. "That's kind of them to say." Noah glanced at Lily, who was regarding him with frank curiosity. "She seems to be settling in well." "Children are remarkably adaptable," Clara said, hanging the last sheet. "Much more so than adults, I think." "And you, Miss Bennett, are you adapting?" The question seemed to surprise her. She considered it thoughtfully before answering. "I believe I am. It's peaceful here. After Philadelphia, after everything, peace is a precious commodity." Noah understood that sentiment all too well. He'd come to Texas seeking the same peace, though it had proven more elusive than he'd hoped. "I've been meaning to ask," Clara continued, gathering her empty laundry basket. "Is there a particular way you prefer the house to be kept? Specific routines or arrangements?" Noah shook his head. "I leave those matters to your judgment. The house has been neglected since our last housekeeper left. Do what you think best." "Very well." She hesitated, then added, "I noticed a small cemetery on the hill behind the house. I don't wish to intrude on private ground if it's not appropriate." Blood and knot formed in Noah's chest. Of course she would have seen it. "My parents are buried there," he said stiffly, "and a marker for my sister. You are welcome to visit if you wish to pay respects, but please don't disturb anything." Clara's expression softened with understanding. "Of course not. I only wanted to be sure I wasn't trespassing." She paused delicately. "Your sister, is she not buried there?" "No." The word came out sharper than Noah intended. He took a breath, moderating his tone. "Her body was never recovered." "I'm very sorry," Clara said quietly. "I didn't mean to pry." Noah looked away, focusing on the distant hills. It was a long time ago. But it wasn't, not really. 5 years since Rachel had been lost to the floodwaters of Miller's Creek. 5 years of wondering if he could have saved her if he'd been there. If he'd known what Jasper Whitfield truly was before it was too late. "Mr. Sullivan," Clara's voice broke through his dark thoughts. "Are you all right?" Noah realized he'd been standing silent for too long, his face betraying emotions he preferred to keep private. "Fine," he said curtly. "Excuse me, I have matters to attend to before dinner." He walked away quickly, cursing himself for the rudeness, but unable to maintain the civil facade a moment longer. Behind him, he felt Clara's gaze, following, no doubt wondering what manner of man she'd tied her fate to. One who couldn't even discuss his family without breaking apart at the seams. Clara watched Noah stride away, his shoulders rigid with tension. Clearly, the subject of his sister was painful territory, something Joe had alluded to but not explained. She made a mental note to avoid the topic in the future, not wishing to cause her benefactor further distress. "Come, Lily," she said, lifting her daughter from the makeshift playpen. "Let's get dinner started." Throughout the evening meal, Noah was quiet, speaking only when directly addressed. The easy conversation of the previous night was replaced by a heavy silence that even Joe's gentle prodding couldn't lighten. After the meal, when Noah had retreated to his study and Joe was entertaining Lily with stories, Clara tackled the kitchen with determined energy. She scrubbed pots, organized shelves, and took inventory of supplies, losing herself in the simple physical work. It was nearly 9 o'clock when she finally gathered a sleepy Lily and prepared to return to their cabin. The night had grown cool, and Clara wrapped a shawl around them both as they stepped outside. The Texas sky above them was a vast canvas of stars, more than Clara had ever seen in Philadelphia's smoke-dimmed skies. She paused on the porch, gazing upward in wonder. "Beautiful, isn't it?" The quiet voice startled her. Noah stood at the corner of the porch, a pipe in his hand, the ember glowing softly in the darkness. "I've never seen so many stars," Clara admitted. Noah moved to stand beside her, looking up at the night sky. My father taught me the constellations when I was a boy. Said they were God's map written in the heavens for those wise enough to read it. Clara glanced at him, surprised by this philosophical turn. Do you believe that? Noah considered the question, drawing on his pipe thoughtfully. I believe there's order in the universe, even when we can't see it from where we stand. He pointed upward. See there, that's the North Star. Slaves used to follow it to freedom during the war. A guiding star, Clara murmured. Yes. Noah lowered his gaze to meet hers. Miss Bennett, I want to apologize for my abruptness earlier. The subject of my sister is difficult for me. No apology necessary, Mr. Sullivan. We all have wounds that haven't fully healed. He studied her face in the moonlight. Your husband? Clara nodded. Thomas died 3 years ago, but his war wounds killed him long before that. He came back, changed, in body and spirit. I'm sorry. The words were simple but sincere. As am I for your sister. Clara shifted Lily, who had fallen asleep, against her shoulder. If you don't mind my asking, what was her name? Rachel. Noah's voice softened on the name. She was 20 when she died, full of life, dreams. He tapped his pipe against the porch rail, emptying it. It's late. You should get the little one to bed. Clara recognized the gentle dismissal. Good night, Mr. Sullivan. Good night, Miss Bennett. As Clara walked back to the cabin, she felt Noah's eyes following her. There was more to his story than he was sharing, some deeper connection to the pain he carried. But it wasn't her place to press. He had given her and Lily shelter when they most needed it. She would respect his privacy in return. In the cabin, Clara settled Lily in her crib, then prepared herself for bed. As she brushed out her hair in the moonlight streaming through the window, she reflected on the strange turn her life had taken in just 2 days. Instead of becoming Jasper Whitfield's wife, she was now Noah Sullivan's housekeeper. Instead of a life in town, she was on an isolated ranch miles from Sweetwater. Yet despite the upheaval, despite the uncertainty of her position, Clara felt an odd sense of rightness about where she had landed. Perhaps it was simply relief at having a roof over their heads and food for Lily. Perhaps it was the peaceful beauty of Starlight Ranch. Or perhaps it was something about Noah Sullivan himself. The quiet strength he projected, the kindness he tried to hide beneath a gruff exterior. Clara slipped beneath the quilt, listening to Lily's soft breathing from the crib. Whatever the reason, for the first time in months, she fell asleep without fear, shadowing her dreams. Outside, beneath the canopy of stars, Noah Sullivan stood alone on his porch for a long time, pipe cold in his hand, gaze fixed on the small light burning in Clara Bennett's cabin until it finally went dark. Days flowed into weeks at Starlight Ranch as May surrendered to June, bringing longer days and intensifying heat. Clara fell into the rhythm of ranch life with surprising ease. Each morning she rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for the hands, her movements becoming more confident as she learned the patterns of the household. The men had accepted her presence without question, tipping their hats respectfully and offering shy thanks for meals that far surpassed Joe's previous efforts. Lily thrived in the open spaces and fresh air. At 8 months, she was beginning to pull herself up on furniture, her curious eyes taking in everything around her. Joe Parker had fashioned a sturdy high chair for the dining room and spent his spare moments carving small wooden toys that delighted the child. Clara had transformed the main house with quiet efficiency. Dusty corners were swept clean, windows shone in the sunlight, and fresh wildflowers appeared in simple jars throughout the rooms. She worked without complaint, often singing softly to herself as she moved through her tasks. Noah watched these changes with silent appreciation. Though he maintained a careful distance, he couldn't help noticing how Clara's presence had breathed life back into Starlight. The house felt like a home again, in ways it hadn't since his mother died. One evening in late June, Noah returned from a long day of mending fences to find Clara on the back porch, shelling peas into a large bowl. Lily sat nearby on a quilt, happily stacking wooden blocks Joe had made for her. The peaceful domesticity of the scene caused Noah to pause in the shadows, reluctant to disturb them. Clara's hair had come loose from its pins, falling in chestnut waves around her shoulders. The setting sun gilded her profile, softening the tired lines around her eyes. She looked up suddenly, as if sensing his presence, and smiled. "Mr. Sullivan," she greeted him. "You're back earlier than expected." Noah stepped forward, removing his hat. The work went faster than anticipated. He nodded toward the bowl in her lap. "Those from the kitchen garden." "Yes," Clara said, pride evident in her voice. The seeds I planted last month are doing well. We should have fresh vegetables through the summer if the weather holds. Noah eased himself onto the porch steps, a respectful distance from where she sat. In the months since Clara had arrived, they'd settled into a comfortable routine of polite interaction, careful to maintain the boundaries between employer and employee. Yet something in the soft evening air made those boundaries feel less defined. "You've made quite a difference here," Noah said quietly. Clara's hands stilled on the peas. "I hope it's been satisfactory. I've tried to be thorough without overstepping." More than satisfactory, Noah watched Lily topple her tower of blocks with a delighted squeal. "The men have never eaten so well, and the house hasn't been this orderly since my mother was alive." A faint blush colored Clara's cheeks at the praise. "I'm glad. I want to earn my keep." "You've done far more than that." Noah hesitated, then added, "I've been meaning to ask if there's anything you need." "You haven't been to town since your arrival." Clara resumed her shelling fingers, moving deftly. "Tommy has been very helpful bringing supplies, but I confess I've been wondering about church services. Lily and I haven't attended since arriving." "Reverend Bailey holds services each Sunday at 10, Noah said. "I could. That is, if you'd like to attend, I could drive you in the buggy." Clara looked up, surprise evident in her blue eyes. "You'd be willing to take us?" Noah shifted uncomfortably. He rarely attended church himself these days, finding little comfort in faith after Rachel's death. But Clara's hopeful expression made refusal impossible. "Of course," he said. "It would be no trouble." "Thank you," Clara replied softly. "I've missed the community of worship." They sat in companionable silence as twilight deepened around them. Fireflies began to emerge, drifting through the yard like floating embers. Lily watched them with wide-eyed wonder, reaching out to catch the glowing insects. "I've never seen fireflies before coming to Texas," Clara commented. "In Philadelphia, the city lights were too bright, I suppose." "Rachel used to call them God's lanterns," Noah said, the memory rising unbidden. "She believed they helped guide lost souls home." Clara glanced at him, clearly surprised by the voluntary mention of his sister. "That's a beautiful thought." Noah immediately regretted the personal disclosure. He stood abruptly, settling his hat back on his head. "I should check on the new calves before turning in." "Of course," Clara said, though he thought he detected a flicker of disappointment in her eyes. "Good night, Mr. Sullivan." "Good night, Miss Bennett." As Noah walked toward the barn, he silently berated himself for the momentary lapse. He'd been careful these past weeks to keep conversation with Clara focused on ranch business and practical matters. Sharing personal memories, especially about Rachel, threatened the careful distance he'd maintained. Yet there was something about Clara Bennett that made him want to lower his guard. Perhaps it was her quiet strength, so reminiscent of his mother's, or her lack of prying questions, offering space for his silence without judgment. Whatever the reason, Noah resolved to be more vigilant. Clara and Lily would remain at Starlight only until they found a more permanent situation. Becoming attached would serve no purpose except to invite more pain when they eventually left. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright. Clara dressed with particular care, selecting her best dress, a navy blue cotton with white piping that had seen better days but was still presentable. She arranged her hair in a simple but elegant knot, then dressed Lily in a white gown with tiny blue ribbons that Clara had sewn from scraps during her evening hours. When they emerged from the cabin, Noah was waiting with the buggy, looking uncharacteristically formal, in a clean black suit and freshly trimmed beard. He helped Clara up onto the seat with careful courtesy, then took the reins. "You both look very nice," he said, surprising Clara with a personal comment. "Thank you," she replied, "as do you." The journey to town was pleasant, the morning still cool before the heat of the day took hold. Clara found herself stealing glances at Noah's profile. Without his usual hat shadowing his features, the morning sunlight revealed hints of auburn in his dark hair and softened the lines of his face. He looked younger, less careworn. "I should warn you," Noah said as they approached Sweetwater. "There may be some curiosity about your presence at Starlight. People talk." Clara's hands tightened slightly around Lily. "I'm aware. Are you concerned about your reputation, Mr. Sullivan?" "No," he said firmly. "I'm concerned about yours." The simple statement touched Clara deeply. After years of shouldering other people's judgments alone, the idea of someone worrying about her reputation was both foreign and comforting. "I appreciate that," she said softly, "but I've faced worse than small-town gossip." Noah glanced at her, a question in his eyes that he didn't voice. Instead, he simply nodded and returned his attention to the road. Sweetwater looked different in the Sunday morning light. Cleaner, more orderly than Clara remembered from her arrival. People dressed in their finest clothes made their way toward the small white church at the center of town, exchanging greetings and pleasantries. Noah guided the buggy to a hitching post near the church. As he helped Clara down, she became acutely aware of the curious stares directed their way. Women whispered behind gloved hands, and men nodded respectfully to Noah, while eyeing Clara with undisguised interest. "Noah Sullivan," a warm voice called. Reverend Bailey approached, his weathered face creased in a welcoming smile. "It's been too long since you've graced our congregation." "Reverend," Noah acknowledged with a nod. "You remember Miss Bennett and her daughter?" "Of course." The elderly minister turned his kind gaze to Clara. "How wonderful to see you both. I trust you are settling in at Starlight." "Very well, thank you," Clara replied. "Mr. Sullivan has been most generous." "Excellent, excellent." Reverend Bailey glanced between them with obvious pleasure. "Well, shall we? Service is about to begin." As they followed the Reverend toward the church entrance, Clara noticed Mrs. Thornton watching from nearby, her pinched expression making her disapproval clear. The sheriff stood beside his wife, offering a polite nod to Noah and Clara as they passed. Inside, Noah led them to a pew near the back. Clara settled Lily on her lap, grateful when the child remained calm, fascinated by the stained glass windows and the sounds of the small pump organ playing softly. The service was simple but heartfelt, with Reverend Bailey preaching on compassion and second chances. Clara found herself moved by the familiar rituals of worship, the shared hymns, the communal prayers, the sense of belonging to something larger than herself. She'd missed this during the difficult months after leaving Philadelphia. Throughout the service, she was conscious of Noah beside her. He followed the rituals with the ease of long practice, though something in his expression suggested he found more obligation than comfort in the proceedings. Still, he sang the hymns in a surprisingly pleasant baritone and bowed his head respectfully during prayers. When the service concluded, Clara braced herself for the social interactions to follow. She didn't have to wait long. As they exited the church, several women approached, curiosity barely disguised as friendliness. "Miss Bennett, isn't it?" A plump woman in a green dress extended her hand. "I'm Margaret Miller, the doctor's wife, and this must be your little girl. What a darling child." "Thank you," Clara replied, shifting Lily to her hip. "This is Lily." "Such a pretty name," Mrs. Miller said, tickling Lily's chin. "And how are you finding life at Starlight? It must be quite an adjustment after Philadelphia." Before Clara could answer, another woman joined them, younger, with a pleasant face and kind eyes. "Don't interrogate the poor woman, Margaret." She smiled at Clara. "I'm Hannah Wilson. My husband runs the general store." "Pleased to meet you both," Clara said, relaxing slightly at Hannah's friendly manner. "We were just wondering if you might be interested in joining our Ladies' Aid Society," Mrs. Miller continued. "We meet on Thursday afternoons. Nothing formal, just sewing and conversation. It would give you a chance to make acquaintances in town." Clara hesitated, touched by the unexpected inclusion, but uncertain if Noah would approve. "That's very kind. I'll need to check with Mr. Sullivan about my responsibilities, but I'd be delighted if possible." "Wonderful," Hannah said warmly. "And please bring little Lily. My Sarah is 2 and would love a playmate." The conversation might have continued, but Mrs. Thornton appeared, inserting herself into the circle with practiced authority. "Ladies," she greeted them, her gaze fixed coldly on Clara. "I see you've met our visitor. Miss Bennett has been telling us how well she's settling in at Starlight," Mrs. Miller replied, either missing or ignoring the older woman's tone. "Yes, I imagine she has," Mrs. Thornton said with a tight smile. "Mr. Sullivan has always been known for his charitable nature." The implication hung in the air, causing Mrs. Miller to flush with embarrassment and Hannah to frown slightly. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks, but maintained her composure. "Mr. Sullivan has indeed been charitable," she agreed evenly. "What everyone would offer honorable employment to a stranger in need." Mrs. Thornton's eyes narrowed. "Honorable? Yes, that's one way to describe it." "The only way, Eleanor," came Noah's deep voice from behind Clara. He'd been speaking with the sheriff, but had apparently noticed the confrontation. "Miss Bennett is an employee of Starlight Ranch. Nothing more, nothing less." Mrs. Thornton seemed unmoved by his statement. Of course, Mr. Sullivan, I meant no disrespect. Her tone suggested otherwise. I merely think it unusual for a single woman to live so remotely with an unmarried employer. Then it's fortunate your opinion wasn't solicited, Noah replied coldly. He turned to Clara. We should be going if we're to make it back before the heat of the day. Clara nodded, relieved to escape the tension. She said quick goodbyes to Mrs. Miller and Hannah, promising to consider the Ladies' Aid Society invitation, then followed Noah to the buggy. As they drove away from town, Clara could feel Noah's anger radiating from him in palpable waves. His hands were tight on the reins, his jaw clenched beneath his beard. I apologize for Mrs. Thornton, he finally said, his voice tight with controlled fury. She has no right to speak to you that way. It's not your fault, Clara assured him, and I've encountered far worse. Noah glanced at her. That doesn't make it acceptable. They rode in silence for several minutes, Lily dozing against Clara's shoulder in the warmth of the day. Finally, Clara spoke. The other ladies seemed kind. Mrs. Miller invited me to join their aid society. Noah's expression softened slightly. Margaret Miller is a good woman. Her husband delivered half the children in the county. He hesitated. If you'd like to attend their meetings, I can arrange transportation. You wouldn't mind? Why would I? Noah looked genuinely puzzled. You're entitled to your own pursuits, Miss Bennett. I'm your employer, not your jailer. Clara smiled at his phrasing. Thank you. I think I would enjoy the company of other women occasionally. As they approached Starlight, Clara found herself surprisingly reluctant for the journey to end. Despite the unpleasantness with Mrs. Thornton, the day had been a welcome change from routine, and Noah's company, when he wasn't guarding himself so carefully, was unexpectedly enjoyable. Mr. Sullivan, she ventured as the ranch came into view. May I ask you something personal? Noah tensed visibly but nodded. You may ask, I may not answer. Fair enough. Clara adjusted Lily on her lap. I've noticed you don't seem to find much comfort in church, yet you know the services well. Were you raised in the faith? For a moment she thought he might refuse to answer. Then his shoulders relaxed slightly. My mother was devout, he said. Never missed a Sunday, rain or shine. She believed with her whole heart. A shadow crossed his face. I find it harder to believe these days. Because of your sister? Clara asked gently. Noah's hands tightened on the reins again. Because I've seen too much that makes no sense. Too much suffering without purpose. He glanced at her. Did your faith survive the war, Miss Bennett? The question caught Clara off guard. She considered it seriously before answering. It was tested, she admitted. Seeing so many young men broken and dying, hearing their prayers go unanswered. Yes, it was tested. She looked down at Lily's sleeping face. But in the end, I could not let it go. Faith was all I had left sometimes. Noah nodded, seemingly satisfied with her honesty. Then I'm glad church brings you comfort. They had reached the ranch. Noah helped Clara down from the buggy, careful not to wake Lily. Their hands met briefly in the exchange, and Clara felt an unexpected current pass between them, a moment of connection that transcended their carefully maintained roles. Thank you for taking us today, she said, stepping back quickly. You're welcome, Noah replied, his expression unreadable. Good day, Miss Bennett. As Clara walked to her cabin, she found herself thinking about Noah Sullivan with new perspective. The glimpses beneath his reserved exterior revealed a man struggling with profound grief and disillusionment. Yet despite his own pain, he had extended kindness to her and Lily when they needed it most. Whatever Mrs. Thornton and others might insinuate, Clara knew there was nothing improper in Noah's treatment of her. If anything, he maintained too much distance, retreating whenever conversation verged on personal territory. Setting Lily in her crib for a nap, Clara changed from her Sunday dress into a simpler work dress. There was dinner to prepare for the hands, and the momentary connection she'd felt with Noah was best forgotten. She was his housekeeper, nothing more, and allowing herself to imagine otherwise would only lead to disappointment. As June melted into July, the Texas heat intensified, turning midday into a furnace that had the ranch hands seeking any available shade during their brief rest periods. Clara adapted her cooking schedule, rising even earlier to complete the baking before the kitchen became unbearably hot, and preparing cold suppers of sliced ham potato salad and fresh vegetables from her thriving garden. Noah found himself increasingly aware of Clara's quiet efficiency. She never complained about the heat or the long hours managing her duties with grace while keeping Lily happy and well-tended. The few times he'd suggested she take an afternoon for rest, she'd politely declined, insisting the work kept her mind occupied. But it was during the evenings that Noah found his carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. After the worst heat of the day subsided, Clara often sat on the porch of her cabin, reading to Lily, or simply enjoying the cooler air. Sometimes Noah would find himself drifting in that direction, drawn by the peaceful tableau they created. On one such evening, he approached with a basket of peaches from the small orchard behind the main house. "Evening, Miss Bennet," he called, not wanting to startle her. "Thought you might enjoy these. First ripe ones of the season." Clara looked up from her mending, a smile lighting her face. "How kind, Mr. Sullivan. Lily and I are particularly fond of peaches." As if hearing her name, Lily crawled enthusiastically toward Noah from her blanket on the porch. In the 2 months since their arrival, the baby had grown noticeably, her cheeks plumper, her movements more coordinated. Noah had kept his distance from the child, wary of becoming attached, but Lily seemed determined to bridge the gap. When she reached his boots, she pulled herself up to standing, clutching his pant leg with chubby fingers. She looked up at him with a gummy smile that pierced something in Noah's chest. "She likes you," Clara observed, setting aside her sewing. "She's becoming quite the explorer now that she can pull herself up." Noah stood frozen, uncertain how to respond to the child's overture. Slowly, awkwardly, he crouched down to Lily's level. "Hello there, little one." Lily reached out, patting his bearded cheek with fascination. The simple, innocent touch nearly undid him. It had been so long since he'd allowed himself this kind of gentle, human connection. "Would you like to hold her?" Clara asked softly. "She's steady enough now to sit on your lap." Noah hesitated, then nodded. He settled onto the porch step, and Clara placed Lily carefully on his knee. The baby immediately reached for his hat, which he'd forgotten to remove. "Curious about everything, isn't she?" he said, a reluctant smile tugging at his lips as Lily explored the hat's brim with determined fingers. "Endlessly," Clara agreed, sitting beside them. "Joe says she'll be walking before we know it." Noah watched as Lily abandoned his hat in favor of the buttons on his shirt. There was something profoundly healing about the child's innocent interest, her complete lack of judgment or expectation. "You're good with her," Clara commented. "Have you spent much time around children?" "Not really," Noah admitted. "I was the youngest in my family." He bounced Lily gently on his knee, rewarded with a delighted giggle. "But they're not so complicated, I suppose. They know what they want and aren't afraid to ask for it." "Unlike adults," Clara said with a knowing smile. "Unlike adults," Noah agreed, returning her smile before he could think better of it. They sat in companionable silence as the sun dipped lower on the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Lily eventually grew drowsy, her explorations slowing as she leaned back against Noah's chest. The trust in the gesture caught at his heart. "I should put her to bed," Clara said, noticing the child's drooping eyelids. Of course, Noah carefully transferred Lily back to her mother's arms, feeling oddly bereft without the warm weight against him. Clara stood adjusting Lily on her hip. "Thank you for the peaches, Mr. Sullivan." "You're welcome." Noah rose as well, keeping a proper distance. "Good night, Miss Bennet." "Good night." As Clara disappeared into the cabin with Lily, Noah remained on the porch step, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening twilight. Something was shifting inside him, something he'd thought long dead and buried. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. With a heavy sigh, Noah pushed himself to his feet and headed toward the small cemetery on the hill. It had become his habit to visit Rachel's marker when his emotions threatened to overwhelm him, seeking some connection to the sister who had understood him better than anyone. The empty grave was silver in the moonlight, the wooden cross casting a long shadow across the ground. Noah knelt beside it, removing his hat. "I don't know what I'm doing, Rach," he said quietly. "I promised myself I wouldn't get attached, wouldn't risk that kind of loss again." He traced the carved letters of her name. "But they're working their way under my skin. Clara with her quiet strength, the baby with her innocent trust." The night breeze rustled through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Noah closed his eyes, imagining for a moment that Rachel was there, offering her gentle wisdom as she always had. "You'd like her," he continued. "Clara, I mean. She reminds me a bit of Ma. Practical, resilient. And the baby," he smiled despite himself, "the baby would have you wrapped around her finger in minutes." Opening his eyes, Noah looked up at the stars scattered across the velvet sky. The same stars Clara had admired that first night at Starlight. The same stars that had witnessed Rachel's death and his own slow withdrawal from life in the years that followed. "I'm afraid, Rach," he admitted to the empty air. "Afraid to care again. Afraid to lose again." He exhaled slowly, and afraid it's already too late to stop it. Rising to his feet, Noah settled his hat back on his head and turned toward the main house. He had decisions to make, boundaries to reestablish. Clara Bennett and her daughter were temporary residents at Starlight, nothing more. He would do well to remember that. On a sweltering Thursday afternoon in mid-July, Clara found herself seated in the comfortable parlor of Hannah Wilson's home in Sweetwater, a piece of embroidery in her lap and Lily playing nearby with Hannah's daughter Sarah. The Ladies' Aid Society had welcomed her warmly, and over the past few weeks, these Thursday gatherings had become a bright spot in Clara's routine. "This heat is positively biblical." Margaret Miller fanned herself vigorously as she spoke. "Poor Henry has been treating heat exhaustion all week. The general store can barely keep ice in stock," Hannah added, passing a tray of lemonade. "Thomas says we've sold more this month than all of last summer." Clara accepted a glass gratefully. True to his word, Noah had arranged for Tommy to drive her into town each Thursday, waiting patiently to return her to Starlight when the meeting concluded. It was a kindness she deeply appreciated, especially as these gatherings provided her first real female friendships since Philadelphia. "How are things at Starlight, Clara?" asked Judith Hayes, the blacksmith's wife. "Keeping cool out there, as well as can be expected," Clara replied. "The old house stays relatively comfortable if I keep the shutters closed during the day." "And how is Mr. Sullivan treating you?" Margaret inquired, her tone carefully neutral, but her eyes bright with curiosity. Clara felt a familiar warmth creep into her cheeks. "Very fairly. He's an excellent employer." The women exchanged knowing glances that made Clara uncomfortable. Despite her best efforts to maintain a strictly professional relationship with Noah, she was aware that her admiration for him occasionally showed in her expression or tone. "Noah Sullivan is a good man," Hannah said kindly. "He's just carried a heavy burden since his sister died." Clara's needle paused mid-stitch. "I know his sister passed, but no one has mentioned how." The room grew quiet, the women looking at each other as if deciding who should speak. Finally, Margaret set down her embroidery with a sigh. "It was a tragedy," she said. "Rachel Sullivan was engaged to be married. Beautiful girl, golden hair, the bluest eyes you ever saw, and a laugh that could light up a room." "Who was she engaged to?" Clara asked, though something in her heart already suspected the answer. "A newcomer to town," Judith continued. "Charming fellow named Jasper Whitfield." Clara's breath caught. Jasper Whitfield. The same man who... The very same. Margaret nodded grimly, though we didn't know his true character then. He arrived in Sweetwater about 5 years ago, set himself up as a businessman. Swept Rachel off her feet with grand talk and expensive gifts. "Noah never trusted him," Hannah added. "There were terrible arguments, I heard. Rachel was headstrong, wouldn't listen to her brother's concerns." "What happened?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Margaret's expression grew somber. "There was a flash flood in the spring of '70. Miller's Creek rose 20 feet in an hour after a thunderstorm. Rachel was trying to cross the ford to reach town." She paused. "They found her horse, but Rachel was swept away." "How awful," Clara murmured, thinking of Noah's pain. "And Jasper?" "Left town right after the funeral," Judith said with evident disgust. "Didn't even help with the search for her body. Just packed up and disappeared." That's when folks started to wonder about his so-called business dealings. "Noah was never the same after," Hannah said softly. "He withdrew from everything, church-town affairs, friendships. Just buried himself in that ranch and his grief." Clara sat very still, absorbing this new information. The pieces were falling into place. Noah's reaction when she mentioned the cemetery, his distrust of faith, his careful distance from emotional attachments, and most significantly, his presence at the station the day she arrived. It couldn't have been coincidence. "Did Jasper ever return to Sweetwater?" she asked carefully. "Not until this spring," Margaret replied. "Must have thought enough time had passed that he wouldn't be recognized. But Noah never forgot. When word spread about the bank robbery, Noah was in town faster than you could blink." Clara's hands trembled slightly as the full implication hit her. Are you saying that Noah shot Jasper Whitfield? Hannah finished quietly. Yes, though officially the report says it was in defense of the sheriff who was in Jasper's line of fire. And that was true, Margaret added hastily. Noah Sullivan is no murderer, but I don't think anyone doubts he recognized Jasper and took the opportunity justice provided. A heavy silence fell over the room. Clara's mind was racing. Noah had killed the man she'd traveled across the country to marry, the man responsible for his sister's death, and then he'd taken her in, given her work, treated her with unfailing respect. Clara, Hannah's gentle voice broke through her thoughts. Are you all right? We shouldn't have spoken of such unpleasant matters. No, Clara said quickly. I'm glad you told me. It explains many things. The conversation gradually shifted to lighter topics, but Clara remained distracted, her thoughts circling around this revelation. When Tommy arrived to drive her back to Starlight, she gathered Lily with unusual haste, eager to return and process what she'd learned in private. The wagon ride was silent, Tommy sensing her preoccupation and respectfully leaving her to her thoughts. As they approached the ranch, Clara caught sight of Noah in the distance, riding the fence line with two of his hands. The familiar figure, straight-backed and solid atop his horse, stirred conflicting emotions within her. She understood now why he had appeared at the station that day, why he had offered her employment. It wasn't random chance or simple charity. It was guilt, perhaps, or a sense of obligation. Jasper Whitfield had taken Noah's sister. Noah had taken Jasper from Clara. A life for a life in the most tragic equation. Yet even knowing this, Clara couldn't summon anger toward Noah. Jasper had been a criminal, a man who had abandoned Rachel in death, just as he would likely have abandoned Clara had he lived. Noah had given her and Lily safety, respect, and stability, far more than Jasper ever would have. As Tommy helped her down from the wagon, Clara made a decision. She would not confront Noah with her knowledge. Not yet. She needed time to consider what it meant for her future at Starlight, and what, if anything, it changed about her growing feelings for the man who had both disrupted and rescued her life in the same moment. Noah noticed the change in Clara immediately. Though she continued her duties with the same efficiency, something in her manner toward him had shifted. Her usual warm greetings became brief nods, her eyes avoiding his conversations limited to necessary exchanges about household matters. For 3 days, Noah puzzled over the transformation, wondering what he might have done to cause such a retreat. Had he been too familiar during their evening on the porch? Had someone in town said something to upset her during the ladies' meeting? On the 4th day, unable to bear the strained silence any longer, Noah sought her out in the kitchen garden, where she was harvesting tomatoes in the cooler hours of early evening. Lily sat nearby in her wooden playpen, contentedly stacking and unstacking tin cups. Miss Bennett, Noah said, approaching slowly, may I speak with you? Clara straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. Of course, Mr. Sullivan. Is there a problem with the house? No, Noah replied, troubled by her formal tone. The problem is that something has clearly upset you, and I'd like to know what it is. Clara's gaze dropped to the basket of tomatoes at her feet. I don't know what you mean. I think you do. Noah stepped closer, keeping his voice gentle. You've barely spoken 3 words to me since returning from town last Thursday. If I've done something to offend you, I'd like the opportunity to address it. For a long moment, Clara remained silent, her internal struggle visible in the tension of her shoulders and the way she worried her lower lip between her teeth. Finally, she looked up, meeting his eyes directly for the first time in days. Why did you hire me, Mr. Sullivan? She asked. The truth, please. Noah felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. He'd wondered when this question would come, had rehearsed answers that would satisfy without revealing too much. But faced with Clara's direct gaze, the prepared half-truths dissolved on his tongue. Because I felt responsible, he admitted. Because Jasper Whitfield was coming to Sweetwater to meet you when he died. When you killed him, Clara corrected quietly. Noah didn't flinch from the accusation. Yes, when I killed him. The ladies told me about Rachel, Clara continued, about her engagement to Jasper, about the flood. Noah's jaw tightened at the mention of his sister. Then you understand. I'm trying to, Clara's voice softened. What I don't understand is why you didn't tell me yourself. Why pretend our meeting was coincidence? Would you have accepted my help if you'd known I was the man who shot your intended husband? Noah asked. Clara considered this. Perhaps not immediately, but I would have appreciated the honesty. I didn't know how to tell you, Noah said simply. And then as time passed, it seemed unnecessary to dredge up painful truths. Unnecessary. Clara's eyes flashed with rare anger. You don't think I had a right to know that the man offering me shelter was the same man who made that shelter necessary? Noah accepted the rebuke with a nod. You're right, I should have told you. His straightforward acknowledgement seemed to deflate some of Clara's indignation. She sighed, pushing a strand of hair from her face. I'm not angry that you shot Jasper, she said more gently. From what I've learned, he deserved justice for many crimes, not least what happened to Rachel. I'm angry that you've treated me like a responsibility, an obligation to be fulfilled rather than a person deserving of the truth. Noah felt shame wash over him. She was right, of course. In his determination to make amends, he'd robbed Clara of agency of the right to make informed choices about her own life. I'm sorry, he said, the words inadequate but sincere. You deserve better. Clara studied his face, seeming to search for something in his expression. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because her posture relaxed slightly. I need to know, she said. Is that all I am to you? An obligation, a way to ease your conscience over Jasper's death? The question caught Noah off guard. He'd been so focused on maintaining proper distance that he hadn't allowed himself to examine his true feelings. Now faced with Clara's direct inquiry, he found he couldn't dissemble. No, he said quietly. That's not all. Something flickered in Clara's eyes. Hope, perhaps, or relief. She took a small step toward him. Then what am I to you, Noah? It was the first time she'd used his given name, and the intimacy of it shook him. The barriers he'd carefully constructed began to crumble under the weight of his unacknowledged feelings. You are... He struggled to find words adequate to express the complex emotions she stirred in him. You're someone who has brought life back to this place, back to me. Someone I've come to care for despite my best efforts not to. Clara's expression softened. And that frightens you. It wasn't a question, but Noah answered anyway. Yes, the last person I cared for died because I couldn't protect her, because I trusted the wrong man. Jasper, Clara said. Noah nodded, the old anger rising like bile in his throat. I knew what he was, a liar, a cheat. But Rachel wouldn't listen. She was so certain she knew better, so convinced by his charm. His hands clenched at his sides. When the flood came, she was trying to reach town to meet him. I was checking cattle in the north pasture. By the time I heard, it was too late. Clara moved closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of darker blue in her eyes. It wasn't your fault, Noah. Wasn't it? The bitterness in his voice surprised even him. I knew Jasper was dangerous. I should have tried harder to convince her. Should have been there that day. Rachel made her own choices, Clara said gently, just as I made mine coming to Texas. We can't protect those we love from every danger, every disappointment. I can try, Noah said fiercely. Clara's smile was sad. And in trying, you've kept yourself apart, alone. Is that what Rachel would have wanted for you? The question struck Noah like a physical blow. Rachel, with her boundless enthusiasm for life, her belief in connection and joy. No, she would have hated seeing him withdraw into isolation and duty. No, he admitted. She wouldn't have understood it at all. Neither do I, Clara said softly. They stood in silence for a moment, the evening breeze carrying the scent of ripening tomatoes and distant rain. Lily's happy babbling provided a counterpoint to the tension between them. Where does this leave us? Noah finally asked. Clara considered the question. With the truth between us, at last. And with choices to make about what comes next. What do you want, Clara? Noah asked, allowing himself the intimacy of her given name. I want what I've always wanted, she replied. A safe place for Lily. Work that has meaning. And she hesitated, then continued with quiet courage. And perhaps in time someone to share that life with. Someone who sees me for who I am, not as an obligation or a responsibility. The vulnerability in her admission touched Noah deeply. He reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, and took her hand in his. Her fingers were warm, slightly rough from garden work, and they curled trustingly around his own. I see you, Clara Bennett, he said, his voice low and earnest. I have from the first moment on that platform, and it terrifies me how much I've come to care for you, for both of you. He glanced at Lily, who was watching them with curious eyes. Clara's smile illuminated her face, transforming it from merely pretty to truly beautiful. Then perhaps we can be frightened together, and brave together too. Noah found himself returning her smile, something tight and painful loosening in his chest. He didn't know what the future held for them, what complications might arise, what judgments they might face. But for the first time in 5 years, he felt hope unfurling within him, fragile and tentative, but undeniably real. "I'd like that," he said simply. As they stood together in the garden, hands linked, the setting sun bathed them in golden light. It wasn't a declaration of love, not yet, but it was a beginning and a step away from the shadows of the past toward a future that suddenly seemed full of possibility. The following Sunday, when Noah and Clara entered the church together, Lily between them, the whispers were immediate and unmistakable. Mrs. Thornton's pinched expression could have curdled milk, and even the kindly Reverend Bailey raised his eyebrows in surprise at their changed demeanor. They weren't openly affectionate. Both were too private, too conscious of propriety for that. But something in the way they moved together, the occasional glance they exchanged, spoke volumes to the observant townsfolk of Sweetwater. "Well, well," Margaret Miller whispered to Hannah as they watched Noah help Clara into a pew, his hand lingering on her elbow a moment longer than strictly necessary. "It seems our Mr. Sullivan has finally thawed." "About time," Hannah replied with a satisfied smile. They suit each other perfectly. Not everyone shared their approval. After the service, as Noah spoke with Sheriff Thornton, Eleanor Thornton cornered Clara by the church steps. "I see you've managed to secure your position at Starlight quite effectively, Miss Bennett," she said, her voice dripping with insinuation. Clara met the older woman's gaze steadily. "My position as housekeeper remains unchanged, Mrs. Thornton, though I appreciate your concern for my employment status." "Come now," Mrs. Thornton scoffed. "We're both women of the world. A widow with a child alone and penniless. I understand the need to make arrangements, but let's not pretend it's anything but what it is." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from anger. "And what exactly do you imagine it is, Mrs. Thornton?" "A convenient arrangement between a lonely man and a desperate woman," Mrs. Thornton replied coldly. "One that will end badly when the initial fascination wears off." Clara took a deep breath, struggling to maintain her composure. "I'm sorry you see the world in such cynical terms. I prefer to believe in second chances, in the possibility of genuine connection between two people who have both known loss." "How poetic," Mrs. Thornton sneered. "I wonder if you'll maintain such lofty sentiments when the gossip reaches Philadelphia, when your reputation is completely beyond salvage." The threat was clear, but Clara refused to be intimidated. "My reputation in Philadelphia is already beyond salvage, Mrs. Thornton. That's why I came west. But unlike you, I've discovered that there are places where people are judged by their actions and character rather than by rumors and appearances." Mrs. Thornton's face flushed with anger. "You impertinent—" "Is there a problem here?" Noah's deep voice interrupted as he approached, his expression darkening as he took in the confrontation. "Not at all, Mr. Sullivan," Mrs. Thornton said, her tone shifting to artificial sweetness. "Miss Bennett and I were just having a friendly chat about community standards." "Indeed," Clara said calmly. "Mrs. Thornton has very firm opinions on appropriate behavior." Noah's gaze shifted between the two women, clearly understanding the undercurrents. "Then I'm sure she applies those standards equally to everyone, including herself." His emphasis on the last word carried clear meaning. Mrs. Thornton's lips thinned to a bloodless line. "If you'll excuse me," she said stiffly, "the Reverend Oz waiting." As she walked away, Noah turned to Clara with concern. "Are you all right? What did she say to you?" "Nothing I haven't heard before," Clara assured him, bouncing Lily gently in her arms. "And nothing that matters." Noah's expression remained troubled. "Eleanor Thornton has a sharp tongue and influence in this town. If she's set against you, against us, it could make things difficult." "Are you worried about gossip, Noah?" Clara asked, studying his face. He considered the question seriously. "Not for myself, but for you and Lily. I don't want to make your lives harder." Clara smiled, touched by his concern. "I spent years in Philadelphia worrying about what others thought, trying to maintain appearances, even as my life fell apart behind closed doors. I'm done living that way." She shifted Lily to her other hip. Besides, Mrs. Thornton is just one person. Hannah and Margaret and the other ladies have been nothing but kind. Noah nodded, though his expression remained somber. Just the same, we should be careful. Take things slowly. I agree, Clara said. We have time to figure out what this is between us. No need to rush or put labels on it that might make others uncomfortable. The relief in Noah's eyes confirmed she'd understood his concerns correctly. Despite the growing feelings between them, they were both still healing, still learning to trust again. And the complications of their situation, her status as his employee, the shadow of Jasper Whitfield, the baby who needed stability, all suggested caution was indeed the wisest course. As they walked to the buggy, Clara felt Eleanor Thornton's hostile gaze following them. The woman's threat to contact Philadelphia troubled her more than she'd admitted to Noah. Not because Clara feared exposure, those bridges were already burned, but because she hadn't been entirely truthful with Noah about her past. He knew Lily was her daughter, not her niece, as she'd claimed to Jasper. But he didn't know the full circumstances of the child's birth. That Lily had been conceived while Thomas was still alive, that her father was Thomas's brother James, that the Bennett family had disowned Clara when the truth became impossible to hide. Sooner or later, she would need to tell Noah everything. If they were to have any future together, complete honesty was essential. But not yet, not today. Today, with the Sunday sun warm on her face and Noah's steady presence beside her, Clara chose to focus on the promise of the present rather than the shadows of the past. As they drove away from Sweetwater, Clara found herself thinking of the conversation in the garden of Noah's admission that he cared for her and Lily. It wasn't a declaration of love, nor had she expected one. But it was a beginning, tentative step towards something that could in time become a family. The thought both exhilarated and terrified her. After so much loss, so much disappointment, daring to hope again felt like stepping onto thin ice. But when she looked at Noah's profile against the Texas sky, Clara knew the risk was one she was willing to take. Beside her, Noah seemed lost in his own thoughts, his expression thoughtful as he guided the horses homeward. Whatever storms might be gathering on their horizon, Eleanor Thornton's malice, the complications of their past, the uncertainties of their future. For now, they were heading home together. And for Clara, that was enough. August arrived with relentless heat that scorched the land, turning the lush green pastures of early summer to brittle gold. The creek that ran through Starlight Ranch dwindled to a trickle, forcing Noah and his men to drive cattle farther each day to find adequate water. Despite the harsh conditions, the ranch prospered under Noah's careful management, and life settled into a rhythm that brought unexpected contentment to all who dwelled there. For Clara, the week since her confrontation with Noah in the garden had been the happiest she'd known in years. Though they maintained appropriate boundaries, he was still her employer. After all, their relationship had deepened into something that defied simple definition. They weren't courting, not officially, but the quiet moments they shared on the porch after Lily was asleep talking about books or ranch business or their hopes for the future held an intimacy that needed no labels. On a particularly sultry evening in mid-August, Clara sat at the kitchen table reviewing the household accounts, while Noah worked on ranch ledgers across from her. Joe had retired early, and Lily slept peacefully in a small bed Noah had built for her in the corner of the kitchen, where Clara could watch her while working. The roof on the south side of the barn needs repair before the fall rains, Noah commented, making a note in his ledger. I'll have the men start on it next week. Clara nodded, not looking up from her own figures. And we should put up more preserves while the garden is still producing. Last winter was mild, but Joe says this one might be harder. I've noticed you say we now when you talk about the ranch, Noah observed, his voice carefully neutral. Clara glanced up, suddenly self-conscious. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to presume. Don't apologize, Noah interrupted gently. I like it. Their eyes met across the table, a current of understanding passing between them. In the lamplight, Clara's chestnut hair gleamed with copper highlights, and the usual tiredness around her eyes had softened. She looked younger, more at peace than when she'd first arrived. It feels like home, she admitted quietly. More than Philadelphia ever did, even before everything. Noah set down his pencil, his expression serious. I want it to be your home, Clara. Yours and Lily's. Clara's heart quickened at his words, but she maintained her composure. We've been very fortunate in your generosity. It's not about generosity. Noah leaned forward, his blue eyes intent. It's about what I want for my future. What I hope you might want too. Before Clara could respond, a distant rumble of thunder broke the moment. Noah rose, moving to the window to scan the dark horizon. "A storm coming," he said, his focus shifting to more immediate concerns. "A big one from the sound of it." Clara joined him at the window. In the distance, lightning illuminated massive thunderheads building in the western sky. After weeks of drought, the sight of potential rain should have been welcome, but something in the storm's approach sent a shiver of apprehension down Clara's spine. "Will the cattle be all right?" she asked. "They should be. The boys brought the herd back to the home pasture yesterday." Noah frowned as another lightning flash revealed the storm's impressive scale. "But this looks like it could be a gully washer. I'd better check the creek bed, make sure nothing's blocked that might cause flooding." Now, in the dark. Clara couldn't keep the concern from her voice. Noah smiled reassuringly. "I know this land like my own hand, even in the dark. I'll take a lantern, be back before the rain starts in earnest." He reached for his hat and oilskin coat hanging by the door. Clara had a sudden irrational urge to stop him, to ask him to stay inside where it was safe. But she knew better than most that a rancher's responsibilities didn't wait for convenient moments. "Be careful," she said instead. Noah paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression that made her breath catch. "I've got reasons to be careful now," he said softly. Then he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him. Clara returned to the kitchen table but found herself unable to focus on the accounts. The approaching storm had disrupted more than just their conversation. It had awakened old anxieties she thought she'd left behind. During the war, storms had often preceded battles, the thunder of nature giving way to the thunder of artillery. And later, during Thomas's long decline, rainstorms had aggravated his pain, leaving Clara helpless to comfort him. Rising again, she moved to check on Lily, who slept peacefully despite the distant thunder. The child's serene face brought Clara a measure of calm. Whatever fears the storm stirred, her daughter remained her anchor, her reason for persevering through hardship. A knock at the kitchen door startled her. Expecting Noah's return, she opened it quickly, only to find Tommy standing on the porch, rain beginning to spatter around him. "Miss Bennett," the young ranch hand said, removing his hat, "Mr. Sullivan asked me to fetch you and Lily to the main house. The storm's coming in hard, and he's worried about that big oak near your cabin." Clara nodded, immediately understanding the concern. The massive oak, while providing welcome shade during the summer heat, could become a hazard in high winds. "Give me a moment to gather Lily's things," she said, already moving to collect the child's blanket and a few necessities. Tommy helped her wrap Lily, who barely stirred, in a heavy quilt. Together they hurried through the increasing rain to the main house, where Joe was lighting additional lamps against the growing darkness. "Storm's a bad one," the old man said, helping Clara settle Lily on the sofa in the parlor. "Creek's already rising from rain upstream. Noah's gone to check if the bridges will hold." Clara's concern deepened. In this weather, shouldn't he wait until morning? Joe shook his head, his weathered face grave. "If Miller's Creek floods, we could lose access to the south pasture where half the herd is grazing. Noah knows what he's doing." The reminder of the creek's name sent a chill through Clara. Miller's Creek, where Rachel Sullivan had been swept away 5 years earlier. The same creek that now threatened to flood again, with Noah out in the darkness trying to prevent disaster. As if sensing her thoughts, Joe patted her hand reassuringly. "Don't you worry. Noah's survived worse than this storm. He'll be back before you know it." But as the night deepened and the storm intensified, Noah did not return. Rain lashed against the windows with increasing fury, and wind howled around the eaves of the house like a living thing. Tommy and 2 other hands who'd been helping at the barn took shelter in the kitchen, while Joe maintained a calm presence that belied the concern in his eyes. Clara paced the parlor, alternating between checking on Lily and peering out the windows into the tempest. The rational part of her mind knew that Noah was experienced, that he understood the land and its dangers. But her heart refused to be calmed by logic. Shortly after midnight, a tremendous crash shook the house. Clara rushed to the window to see the massive oak near her cabin split by lightning, half of its bulk now crushing the small structure where she and Lily would have been sleeping. "Lord have mercy," Joe murmured, coming to stand beside her. "Good thing Noah had the foresight to bring you here." Clara nodded numbly, imagining what might have happened had they remained in the cabin. Her gratitude for Noah's precaution was overshadowed only by her growing fear for his safety. "Joe," she said quietly, "how long should we wait before becoming concerned about Noah?" The old man's hesitation told her everything she needed to know. "He should have been back by now," Joe admitted, "but the bridges might be out, forcing him to take the long way around." Or something's happened to him, Clara said, giving voice to her deepest fear. Joe didn't contradict her. Instead, he turned to Tommy and the other hands. At first light, if he's not back, we'll organize search parties. The long hours until dawn were the most difficult Clara had experienced since arriving at Starlight. She tried to rest dozing fitfully on the sofa near Lily, but her dreams were troubled by images of raging water and a lone figure swept away in the current. She woke repeatedly, hoping each time to find Noah had returned only to face renewed disappointment. As gray light finally began to filter through the rain-streaked windows, the storm's fury abated somewhat. The constant drumming on the roof eased to a steady patter, and the wind's howl diminished to occasional gusts. Joe, who had kept vigil throughout the night, rose stiffly from his chair. "Tommy Powell," he called to the young hand, who had also remained awake. "Saddle the horses. We need to check the damage and find the boss." Clara stood as well, decision crystallizing within her. "I'm coming with you." Joe frowned. "Miss Bennett, that's not wise. The terrain will be treacherous, and someone needs to stay with Lily. Mrs. Torres can watch her," Clara said, referring to the cook's wife who lived in a small house near the bunkhouse. "I was a field nurse during the war, Joe. If Noah's injured, you'll need me." The old man studied her determined expression, then nodded reluctantly. "All right, but you stay close to me and you do exactly as I say." The land after a flood can be as dangerous as the flood itself. While Tommy roused the other hands and prepared the horses, Clara arranged for Lily's care with Mrs. Torres, who arrived at the main house wrapped in a heavy shawl, her round face creased with worry. "You'll be careful, Senora," the older woman warned as she took charge of the still sleeping child. "The creek, she is very angry this morning." Clara changed into her most practical clothing, a sturdy skirt, heavy boots borrowed from the mudroom, and one of Noah's old shirts over her blouse for additional warmth. She pinned her hair tightly under a wide-brimmed hat and joined the men in the yard. The devastation wrought by the storm was immediately apparent. Branches littered the ground, a section of the corral fence had collapsed, and standing water covered much of the yard. In the distance, where the usually docile creek meandered through Starlight's pastures, a churning brown torrent now raged. Joe helped Clara mount a gentle mare, then swung onto his own horse with surprising agility for his age. "We'll check the main bridge first," he instructed the group of 6 riders. "If it's gone, we'll split up and search both banks, heading downstream." The ride to the creek was slow and difficult, the horses picking their way carefully through debris-strewn paths and patches of mud that threatened to swallow their hooves. As they approached the crossing, Clara's heart sank. The wooden bridge that had spanned the creek was completely gone, with only a few splintered pilings remaining as evidence of its existence. "He wouldn't have tried to cross here," Tommy said, voicing what they all hoped. "Not with the water this high." "No," Joe agreed. "He'd have headed for the stone bridge near the county road. It's higher, more substantial." They followed the creek's swollen path, the men calling Noah's name periodically, their voices barely carrying over the rush of the water. Clara's eyes scanned the banks continuously, dreading what she might find, yet desperate for any sign of him. They had ridden perhaps 2 miles when one of the hands pointed to something caught in a tangle of branches at the water's edge. "There is that, a horse," Joe urged his mount closer to the creek bank. "It's midnight," he confirmed, grimly recognizing Noah's black gelding. The horse lay half submerged in the muddy water, clearly dead, its neck bent at an unnatural angle. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. If the powerful horse had been unable to withstand the current, what chance had Noah? Spread out. Joe ordered, his voice tight with emotion. "Search both sides of the creek. He might have been thrown clear, made it to shore." The group divided, 3 riders taking the far bank while Clara remained with Joe and Tommy on the near side. They moved downstream, methodically scrutinizing every foot of the muddy shore, calling Noah's name with increasing desperation as the morning wore on. It was Clara who spotted him first. A dark shape slumped against an outcropping of rock some 20 feet from the creek's edge. "There!" she cried, already dismounting before her horse had fully stopped. She ran toward the motionless figure, her heart hammering against her ribs. Noah lay on his side, one arm twisted beneath him, his face pale and streaked with mud. Blood matted his hair where his head had struck the rock, and his breathing was shallow and irregular. "Noah!" Clara called, dropping to her knees beside him. "Noah, can you hear me?" His eyelids flickered but didn't open. Clara quickly assessed his injuries with practiced hands, feeling for broken bones and checking the wound on his head. The gash was deep, but had mostly stopped bleeding, and his right shoulder appeared dislocated. Most concerning was his temperature. His skin felt cool and clammy, despite the warm morning suggesting shock. Joe and Tommy arrived moments later, dismounting hastily. "He's alive," Clara told him, her nurse's training taking precedence over her personal feelings. "But injured and suffering from exposure. We need to get him back to the house immediately." "Is it safe to move him?" Joe asked, kneeling beside her with unexpected agility. Clara nodded. "I don't feel any broken bones in his back or neck. The shoulder is dislocated, but we can stabilize it for transport." Together, they fashioned a makeshift stretcher from blankets and tree branches. With infinite care, they lifted Noah onto it, securing him with ropes from their saddles. Tommy rode ahead to prepare the house while the remaining hands helped Joe and Clara transport their precious cargo. The journey back to Starlight seemed interminable to Clara. Every jolt of the improvised stretcher made her wince, imagining Noah's pain, though he remained unconscious. She walked beside him, one hand resting lightly on his chest, reassuring herself with each rise and fall that he still breathed. By the time they reached the ranch, Mrs. Torres had prepared Noah's bedroom with fresh linens and heating bricks. Doc Miller had been summoned from town, though the flooding would likely delay his arrival. Clara took charge, immediately directing the men in, carrying Noah upstairs and positioning him carefully on the bed. "I need hot water, clean cloths, and my medical kit from the cabin," she instructed, already unbuttoning Noah's mud-caked shirt. "And whiskey, the good bottle from Mr. N. Sullivan's study." Joe raised an eyebrow but didn't question her. Within minutes, Clara had everything she needed to begin treating Noah's injuries. She cleaned the head wound carefully, relieved to find it looked worse than it was. The shoulder would be more challenging. "Joe," she said, looking up at the old man who hovered anxiously nearby, "I need to reduce his shoulder before he regains full consciousness. It will be easier on him that way. Can you help me?" Joe nodded solemnly. "Just tell me what to do." Clara positioned herself at Noah's head, placing one hand on his chest for stability. "Hold his body steady. When I count to 3, I'm going to pull his arm while rotating it slightly. It will make a sound when it goes back into place." Joe braced himself, his gnarled hands surprisingly strong as they held Noah still. Clara took a deep breath, then began the careful manipulation she'd performed dozens of times in field hospitals. With a sickening pop, the joint returned to its socket. Noah groaned, his eyelids fluttering. Clara immediately poured a small measure of whiskey, lifting his head gently to help him drink. "This will help with the pain," she murmured as he swallowed reflexively. His eyes opened briefly, focusing hazily on her face. "Clara," he whispered. "I'm here," she assured him, stroking his damp hair back from his forehead. "You're safe now. Rest." Whether from the whiskey or sheer exhaustion, Noah drifted back into unconsciousness. Clara continued her ministrations, bandaging his head, binding his shoulder, and carefully cleaning other minor cuts and bruises. Finally, with Joe's help, she changed him into dry clothing and covered him with warm blankets. "You should rest too," Joe said gently when they had finished. "You've been up all night and now this." Clara shook her head. "I'll stay with him. He shouldn't be alone when he wakes." She glanced toward the door. "But I would appreciate checking on Lily." Joe nodded, understanding. "I'll send Mrs. Torres up with the little one and some food for you as well. You need to keep up your strength." When Joe had gone, Clara pulled a chair close to Noah's bedside and allowed herself a moment of emotional release. Tears she'd held back during the search and subsequent treatment flowed freely now, a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and lingering fear. She took Noah's hand in hers, pressing it to her cheek. "Don't you dare leave me," she whispered fiercely. "Not when I've only just found you." Consciousness returned to Noah in fragments. The dull throb of pain in his shoulder and head, the softness of his own bed beneath him, the gentle pressure of someone holding his hand. He struggled to open his eyes, fighting through layers of fog that seemed to blanket his mind. When he finally managed it, the first thing he saw was Clara asleep in a chair beside his bed. Her head had dropped forward onto her chest, and she still wore the mud-stained clothes from the search. Even in obvious exhaustion, her hand remained clasped around his. The sight of her stirred something profound in Noah's chest. He had vague, disjointed memories of the flood. Midnight, losing his footing in the current, the terrifying sensation of being swept away, the impact against the rocks. He remembered thinking of Clara as the darkness claimed him, regretting all the things he hadn't said. He tried to speak, but his throat was too dry, producing only a raspy croak. Still, it was enough to rouse Clara. She lifted her head, blinking sleep from her eyes, and when she saw him looking at her, her expression transformed with joy. "Noah," she breathed, squeezing his hand. "Thank God." "Water," he managed to whisper. Clara quickly poured a glass from the pitcher on the nightstand, supporting his head as he drank gratefully. When he'd had enough, she eased him back against the pillows. "How long?" he asked, his voice slightly stronger. "Almost 2 days," Clara replied. "You've been drifting in and out. Doc Miller came yesterday, said you were lucky. The head wound isn't as serious as it looked, and your shoulders should heal completely with rest." Noah processed this information slowly. "The ranch, the cattle." "Everything's fine," Clara assured him. "Joe and the men have managed. The bridge is gone, but the herd is safe. Even your cabin survived, though mine didn't fare so well." Noah frowned, trying to remember. "The oak tree," Clara nodded. "Lightning split it right down the middle. Half of it crushed the cabin. If you hadn't sent Tommy to bring us to the main house." She trailed off, not needing to complete the thought. "I dreamed about Rachel," Noah said suddenly, the memory surfacing from the fog of his semi-conscious state. "She was standing on the far bank watching me in the water, but she didn't look, she was smiling." Clara's expression softened. "Perhaps she was watching over you." "Perhaps." Noah was silent for a moment, then asked, "Where's Lily?" "With Mrs. Torres. She's been up to see you several times, though you probably don't remember. She kept trying to give you her wooden horse. I think she thought it would make you feel better." A smile tugged at Noah's lips. Smart girl. Clara studied his face, her professional assessment mixing with personal concern. "How do you feel, truthfully?" "Like I've been trampled by the entire herd," Noah admitted. "But I'm alive, which is more than I expected when the creek took midnight." At the mention of his horse, Noah's expression clouded with genuine grief. Midnight had been his companion for 8 years, a gift from his father before the old man died. "I'm sorry about Midnight," Clara said softly. "Joe said he was a fine horse. The best." Noah was quiet for a moment, honoring the memory of his faithful mount. Then he looked up at Clara, taking in her exhausted appearance and mud-stained clothing. "You found me." It wasn't a question, but Clara nodded anyway. "We all did. Joe, Tommy, the other hands. When you didn't come back that night, you came looking for me in dangerous conditions after a flood." Noah's voice held a mixture of gratitude and gentle rebuke. "That was foolish, Clara." "Yes," she agreed without hesitation, "and I'd do it again in a heartbeat." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, its implications clear. Noah felt a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with his injuries. "You need rest," he said, noticing the dark circles beneath her eyes. "You've been taking care of me, but who's been taking care of you?" Clara smiled tiredly. "I'm fine. I've gone much longer without sleep during the war." "You're not in the war now," Noah pointed out, "and I'm not going anywhere. Get some proper rest, Clara. Please." She hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave him, but the exhaustion etched on her face betrayed how desperately she needed sleep. "All right," she finally conceded, "but I'll be in the next room and Mrs. Torres will sit with you. Promise you'll call if you need anything." "I promise," Noah assured her. "Now go." After Clara had gone, Noah lay back against his pillows, contemplating how close he had come to death and how much he suddenly wanted to live. The flood had washed away more than just bridges and fences. It had swept aside the last of his reservations about allowing himself to care for Clara and Lily. Life was fragile, unpredictable. He had been given a second chance, and he didn't intend to waste it. The following days brought steady improvement to Noah's condition and a gradual return to normalcy at Starlight Ranch. The damage from the storm was substantial, but not catastrophic. Fences could be mended, bridges rebuilt, life restored. Clara divided her time between her regular duties and caring for Noah, who proved to be a frustratingly impatient patient. By the end of the first week, he was insisting on coming downstairs against Doc Miller's orders. By the second week, he was trying to review ranch ledgers and give instructions to the hands from the parlor sofa where Clara had confined him. "You're the most stubborn man I've ever met," she declared one afternoon, finding him studying maps of the south pasture when he was supposed to be resting. "Determined," Noah corrected with a hint of a smile. "There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing." Clara crossed her arms, trying to look stern, but the twitch of her lips betrayed her. There was something endearing about Noah's restlessness, his driving need to be useful even while injured. Their relationship had shifted subtly during his recovery. The careful distance they'd maintained before the flood had given way to a new intimacy born of shared crisis. Clara no longer hesitated to touch him, straightening his sling, checking his bandages, sometimes simply resting her hand on his arm while they talked. And Noah, for his part, had stopped guarding his expressions, allowing her to see his affection, his admiration, his growing dependence on her presence. Lily, too, had formed a stronger bond with Noah during his convalescence. The toddler brought him toys, climbed onto the sofa beside him for stories, and seemed to understand instinctively that he needed gentle handling. Noah had abandoned all pretense of keeping emotional distance from the child, his face lighting up whenever she entered the room. It was a domestic tableau that neither Clara nor Noah had anticipated when she first arrived at Starlight, yet it felt surprisingly natural, as if they'd been meant to find each other all along. But as idyllic as these days were, Clara couldn't fully embrace them. A shadow hung over her happiness, the knowledge that she still hadn't told Noah the complete truth about her past. Each day that passed made the omission weigh more heavily on her conscience. On a mild evening in early September, with Noah recovered enough to sit on the porch and watch the sunset, Clara finally found the courage to address what had been troubling her. "Noah," she began, settling into the rocking chair beside him, "there's something I need to tell you, something I should have explained long ago." He turned to her, his expression open. "What is it?" Clara took a deep breath, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "It's about Lily, about her father." Noah nodded encouragingly. "You mentioned before that you claimed she was your niece to avoid scandal. I assumed her father was someone you knew after your husband died." "No," Clara said quietly. "Thomas was still alive when Lily was conceived." Understanding dawned in Noah's eyes, but he didn't speak, giving her space to continue. "My husband returned from Gettysburg with a bullet lodged near his spine." Clara explained, her voice steady despite the painful memories. "The surgeons couldn't remove it without causing more damage. He was in constant pain, dependent on laudanum just to get through each day." She paused, gathering her courage to speak aloud what she'd rarely admitted even to herself. "Thomas's older brother James came to help when we returned to Philadelphia. He'd been discharged earlier unwounded. At first he was just support, someone to help lift Thomas, to run errands, to sit with him when I needed rest." Clara's voice faltered slightly. "But over time, as Thomas withdrew more and more into his pain and medication, James and I, we found comfort in each other." Noah's expression remained neutral, non-judgmental. "You were both caring for someone you loved under impossible circumstances." Clara nodded gratefully at his understanding. "It wasn't an affair, not really, just one night when Thomas had finally fallen asleep after hours of agony, when James and I were both exhausted and heartsick." She closed her eyes briefly. "I've never forgiven myself for that weakness." "Did Thomas know?" Noah asked gently. "No, he died 3 months later, never knowing about the baby." Clara met Noah's gaze directly. "But others figured it out. The timing was obvious once I began to show. James denied everything, returned to his wife in Boston. The Bennett family disowned me, called me terrible names. I lost my nursing position. If it hadn't been for a few friends from the hospital taking me in, I don't know what would have happened to us." Noah was quiet for a long moment, absorbing her story. "And that's why you became a mail-order bride, to escape the judgment." "Yes," Claire admitted. "I thought a fresh start far from Philadelphia was our only chance. I didn't expect to find this." She gestured, vaguely encompassing Starlight Noah, the life they'd begun to build. "Thank you for telling me," Noah said, reaching across to take her hand. "It can't have been easy to carry that alone." Relief washed through Clara at his calm acceptance. "You're not disappointed in me." Noah's expression grew thoughtful. "We've all made choices we regret, Clara. Done things out of grief or loneliness or desperation that we wish we could undo." He squeezed her hand gently. "But those choices brought Lily into the world. And they brought you here to Starlight, to me. How could I possibly regret that?" Tears pricked at Clara's eyes. "I was so afraid to tell you. After everything with Mrs. Thornton, the gossip in town, I thought it might be too much on top of everything else." "Eleanor Thornton doesn't dictate what matters to me," Noah said firmly. And neither does anyone else in Sweetwater. What matters is here on this ranch. You lily the life we could build together. Clara's heart quickened at his words. What are you saying, Noah? He shifted in his chair to face her more directly, wincing slightly as the movement jarred his healing shoulder. I'm saying that I love you, Clara Bennett. You and Lily both. I'm saying that nearly dying in that flood made me realize what a fool I've been wasting time on fear and caution when life can end in an instant. Noah, Clara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I don't want to be your employer anymore, he continued. I don't want proper distance or careful boundaries. I want to wake up each morning knowing you'll be there, raise Lily together, grow old on this ranch, surrounded by whatever family we create. He paused, suddenly uncertain. If that's what you want too. Clara could hardly speak through the tightness in her throat. It is, she managed. It's everything I want. Noah smiled, the last shadows of grief lifting from his face. Then marry me, Clara. Be my wife, my partner in everything. Yes, she said without hesitation, joy bursting through her like sunshine after rain. Yes, I'll marry you. He leaned forward, closing the distance between them, and kissed her gently. It was their first kiss, sweet, tender, full of promise. When they broke apart, Clara felt as though something long broken inside her had finally begun to heal. There will be talk, she warned, practical, even in her happiness. Mrs. Thornton and her circle won't approve. Noah chuckled. Let them talk. We'll be too busy living to notice. As the last light faded from the sky, they remained on the porch, hands intertwined, planning their future together. For the first time since the war had upended her life, Clara felt completely, unreservedly happy. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The news of Noah Sullivan's engagement to his housekeeper spread through Sweetwater like wildfire. Reactions were mixed. Hannah Wilson and Margaret Mellon expressed genuine delight, while Eleanor Thornton's circle clucked their tongues in disapproval. Sheriff Thornton offered gruff congratulations when Noah came to town, while Reverend Bailey beamed with pleasure at the prospect of performing the ceremony. Clara found herself the object of intense curiosity during her weekly visits to the Ladies' Aid Society, but Hannah's steadfast friendship and Margaret's maternal protectiveness shielded her from the worst of the gossip. And when Eleanor Thornton hinted darkly about information from Philadelphia that might interest the good people of Sweetwater, Margaret surprised everyone by rising to her full considerable height and informing Mrs. Thornton that Christian charity begins with minding one's own business. At Starlight, preparations for the wedding proceeded alongside the regular work of the ranch. Joe Parker walked about with a permanent smile, having appointed himself unofficial guardian of the bride. The hands treated Clara with a mixture of respect and shy pleasure in her happiness, while Tommy blushed furiously when Noah asked him to be part of the wedding party. Only one shadow marred Clara's joy, a letter that arrived in early October addressed to her in unfamiliar handwriting with a Kansas postmark. She opened it alone in the kitchen, and the color drained from her face as she read, Miss Bennett. You may not know me, but I am Victor Whitfield, brother to Jasper, whom you intended to marry. I have recently learned of your presence in Sweetwater and your relationship with Noah Sullivan. I feel it my duty to inform you that Sullivan deliberately murdered my brother. The story of self-defense or protection of the sheriff is a convenient fiction. Sullivan blamed Jasper for the death of his sister and executed him in cold blood when the opportunity presented itself. I will be arriving in Sweetwater on the 15th of October to address this injustice. I suggest you reconsider your association with a man capable of such calculated violence. Victor Whitfield. Clara's hands trembled as she set the letter down. The 15th of October, just 1 week away and 3 days before her wedding to Noah. The timing could not have been worse. She debated whether to show Noah the letter immediately or wait until he returned from checking the north pasture boundaries. Before she could decide, Joe entered the kitchen, his weathered face brightening at the sight of her. There's my girl, he said cheerfully. Tommy's back from town with those fabric samples you wanted to see. Clara quickly folded the letter and tucked it into her pocket. Thank you, Joe. I'll look at them shortly. The old man paused, studying her face. Something wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Just wedding nerves, Clara lied, forcing a smile. There's so much to do before the 18th. Joe seemed unconvinced but didn't press the issue. Well, don't you worry about a thing. Between me and Mrs. Torres and the boys, we'll make sure it's the finest wedding Sweetwater's ever seen. As soon as Joe left, Clara retrieved the letter, reading it again more carefully. Victor Whitfield's accusations weren't entirely false. Noah had recognized Jasper and had taken the shot with the knowledge of who he was killing. But Clara had heard enough from Joe and others to know that Jasper had indeed been aiming at the sheriff when Noah fired. It had been justice, not murder. Still, Victor Whitfield's arrival threatened to disrupt more than just their wedding. If he publicly accused Noah of murder, it could lead to an investigation, possibly even a trial. The thought of Noah facing such ordeal just as they were beginning their life together was unbearable. Clara was still considering her options when Noah returned that evening. One look at her troubled expression, and he knew something was wrong. "What is it?" he asked, hanging his hat by the door. Wordlessly, Clara handed him the letter. Noah read it quickly, his face hardening as he absorbed Victor Whitfield's threats. "I'm sorry," he said when he finished. "You shouldn't have to deal with this." "It's not me I'm worried about," Clara replied. "These accusations, could they cause legal problems for you?" Noah considered the question seriously. "Possibly, though the sheriff was there, saw everything. He knows Jasper was drawing on him when I fired." "But it would be your what against Victor's," Clara pressed. "And you did know who Jasper was when you shot him." "Yes," Noah admitted, not attempting to deny it. "I recognized him the moment he walked into the bank. First time I'd seen him in 5 years, but I'd know that face anywhere." His jaw tightened. "When he pulled his gun on Daniel, I didn't hesitate. And I can't honestly say I regretted it afterward." Clara moved to him, taking his hands in hers. "We need to tell Sheriff Thornton about this letter. Prepare him for Victor's arrival." Noah nodded agreement. "I'll ride into town tomorrow." He studied her face. "Are you having second thoughts, Clara? About marrying me?" "No," she said firmly. "Never that. But I am concerned about what this Victor Whitfield might do. Men seeking revenge can be dangerous." "I won't let him harm you or Lily," Noah promised, drawing her into his arms. "Whatever happens, I'll protect you both." Clara rested her head against his chest, taking comfort in his solid strength. "We'll protect each other," she corrected. "That's what family does." Sheriff Daniel Thornton was not a man easily alarmed, but the letter Clara had received clearly troubled him. He read it twice before handing it back to Noah, his expression grave. "I remember Victor Whitfield," he said, leaning back in his chair at the sheriff's office. "Came to claim Jasper's body after the robbery. Cold fish, even in grief. Didn't stay long." "What do you make of his accusations?" Noah asked. The sheriff sighed heavily. "Look, Noah, we both know you recognized Jasper that day. I'm not blind and I'm not stupid, but the fact remains that he was pointing his gun at me when you fired. That makes it a clean shoot, whatever your personal feelings might have been. Will that be enough if Victor pushes for an investigation?" "Should be," Daniel said, though he didn't sound entirely confident. "Unless he's got evidence we don't know about. Witnesses maybe who'd say different." Noah frowned. There were dozens of people on that street. Anyone could have seen what happened. "True, but most folks in Sweetwater hold you in high regard. They'd be reluctant to testify against you even if they did see something questionable." The sheriff rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "When is he supposed to arrive?" "The 15th, Noah replied, 3 days before our wedding." Daniel's expression softened slightly. "Eleanor mentioned you'd set a date. Congratulations, by the way." He hesitated, then added, "She's not been kind about your engagement. I want you to know I don't share her views." "Thank you," Noah said, genuinely appreciative of the support. "That means a lot coming from you." "Miss Bennett seems like a fine woman," the sheriff continued, "and Lord knows you've been alone too long since Rachel." He tapped the letter on his desk. "As for this, leave it with me. I'll keep an eye out for Victor, have a word with him when he arrives. See what he's really after." "I'd appreciate that," Noah said, rising to leave. "But I should warn you, if he threatens Clara or Lily in any way, I won't stand idly by." The sheriff's expression turned serious again. "Don't do anything foolish, Noah. You've got a future worth protecting now. Let the law handle this." Noah nodded, though his eyes remained hard. "I'll try, but some things a man has to handle himself." As Noah rode back to Starlight, his mind worked through contingency plans. The timing of Victor's arrival so close to the wedding couldn't be coincidence. The man was clearly hoping to disrupt their happiness to extract some twisted form of revenge for his brother's death. Noah had no illusions about Jasper Whitfield. The man had been a criminal, a con artist who had broken Rachel's heart and indirectly caused her death. But Victor might not see it that way. Brothers had a way of overlooking each other's faults, of creating narratives that painted their blood as the wrong party. By the time Noah reached the ranch, he had decided not to share his concerns with Clara. She had enough to worry about with the wedding preparations. He would handle Victor Whitfield one way or another and ensure that nothing disrupted their future together. October 15th dawned clear and cool with the crisp air of autumn replacing summer's heavy heat. Clara dressed with particular care, selecting a simple but elegant blue dress that Noah had once complimented. They were scheduled to meet with Reverend Bailey that afternoon to discuss the wedding ceremony, but first they needed to deal with Victor Whitfield's expected arrival. Noah had insisted on accompanying Clara into town, unwilling to let her face Victor alone. As they drove the buggy down Sweetwater's main street, Clara was acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way. Word of their impending marriage had made them objects of fascination, and the blue silk ribbon on Clara's bonnet, a traditional symbol of a bride-to-be, drew even more attention. "Remember," Noah said quietly as they approached the church where they were to meet Reverend Bailey, "if Whitfield appears, let me do the talking." Clara gave him a pointed look. "I'm perfectly capable of speaking for myself, Noah Sullivan." A reluctant smile tugged at his lips. "I know you are. That's what worries me." Before Clara could retort, a commotion further down the street caught their attention. A group had gathered outside the sheriff's office, voices raised in what sounded like an argument. At the center stood Sheriff Thornton and a tall, lean man in an expensive suit, a stranger to Sweetwater. "That must be him," Noah said grimly, helping Clara down from the buggy. "Victor Whitfield." They approached cautiously, Noah positioning himself slightly in front of Clara in a protective stance that she found both endearing and unnecessary. As they drew closer, they could hear Victor's raised voice. "I demand justice, Sheriff. My brother was murdered in cold blood by Noah Sullivan, and I have witnesses who will testify to it." Sheriff Thornton maintained a calm demeanor despite the public confrontation. "Mr. Whitfield, I've explained that the shooting was investigated at the time and deemed justified. Your brother was robbing the bank and had drawn his weapon on a lawman." "Convenient," Victor sneered. "And I suppose it's also convenient that Sullivan is now engaged to the woman my brother was coming to marry. The timing suggests a rather calculated plan." "Wouldn't you say?" At this, murmurs ran through the gathered crowd. Clara felt her cheeks burn with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. Noah's hand found hers, squeezing gently in reassurance. "That's enough, Whitfield," Noah called, stepping forward. "If you have accusations to make them to my face, not in the street like a coward." Victor Whitfield turned his cold eyes, assessing Noah. He was younger than Jasper had been, perhaps 30, with the same dark hair but sharper features and a calculating gaze that held none of his brother's charisma. "Sullivan," he acknowledged with a tight smile. "How fortunate. I was just explaining to the good sheriff how you murdered my brother to clear the path to his fiancée." Noah's expression remained impassive, though Clara could feel the tension radiating from him. "Your brother was a bank robber and a con man. He died because he pulled a gun on Sheriff Thornton. Any connection to Miss Bennett is coincidental." "Is it?" Victor's gaze shifted to Clara, his scrutiny making her skin crawl. "Miss Bennett? Or should I say Mrs. Bennett? I've made inquiries in Philadelphia, you see. Fascinating what one can learn about a person's past." Clara stiffened but kept her voice steady. "My past is no secret, Mr. Whitfield. Mr. Sullivan knows everything about me." "Does he?" Victor smiled unpleasantly. "Does the town know that Lily isn't your niece, as you claimed to my brother? That she's your illegitimate child, conceived while your husband was still alive? That you were driven from Philadelphia in disgrace?" Gasps and whispers erupted from the onlookers. Clara felt as though the ground had dropped away beneath her feet. Noah's grip on her hand tightened painfully. "That's enough," he growled, taking a step toward Victor. "Noah," Sheriff Thornton warned, moving between the two men. "Not here." But Victor wasn't finished. "I wonder what else they don't know, that you were desperate enough to agree to marry a man you'd never met, that you'd have married my brother, a man you now call a criminal. If he'd lived," his voice rose, addressing the growing crowd, Is this the sort of woman Sweetwater welcomes? A woman without morals, without shame? Stop it. The voice that rang out wasn't Noah's but Hannah Wilson's. She pushed through the crowd to stand beside Clara, her gentle face flushed with righteous anger. How dare you come to our town and speak to Miss Bennett this way? Whatever her past, she has shown nothing but dignity and kindness since arriving in Sweetwater. That's right, Margaret Miller added, joining them with several other women from the Aid Society. And who are you to judge Mr. Whitfield, a stranger, the brother of a bank robber? Clara was overwhelmed by the unexpected support. She had feared judgment, rejection when the truth emerged, but instead found these women forming a protective circle around her. Victor looked momentarily disconcerted by the show of solidarity. Ladies, I merely thought you should know who you've welcomed into your community. A woman who survived war and loss and hardship. Reverend Bailey interrupted, his elderly voice carrying a surprising authority as he approached from the church. A woman who has earned the respect of this community through her actions, not her past. The Reverend turned to address the crowd directly. Judge not lest ye be judged, he quoted. Let those without sin cast the first stone. Are we not taught forgiveness, compassion, the value of redemption? A murmur of agreement rose from many in the crowd, though Clara noted some, including Eleanor Thornton, remained stony-faced. Victor Whitfield's expression hardened. Very touching, but my concern isn't with Miss Bennett's morality. It's with the fact that Noah Sullivan murdered my brother. He turned back to the sheriff. I have a sworn statement from a witness who says Sullivan fired before Jasper drew his weapon. I want him arrested and tried for murder. Sheriff Thornton's expression remained skeptical. I'll need to see this statement, Mr. Whitfield, and interview your witness personally. Of course, Victor replied smoothly. I'm staying at the hotel. I'll bring the documents to your office this afternoon. He cast a cold glance at Noah. I suggest you postpone your wedding plans, Sullivan. You may be otherwise occupied very soon. With that parting shot, Victor turned and walked away, leaving a buzz of conversation in his wake. The crowd began to disperse, though many cast sympathetic glances toward Clara and Noah. Are you all right? Noah asked Clara quietly, his face tight with concern and barely controlled anger. Yes, she replied, though in truth she felt shaken to her core. Noah, if he really has a witness. He doesn't, Noah said firmly. Or if he does, they're lying. Daniel was there. He saw everything. Sheriff Thornton approached them, his expression troubled. Noah, I think you should come to my office this afternoon when Whitfield brings his evidence. I want you to hear what he has. Noah nodded grimly. I'll be there. Hannah touched Clara's arm gently. Don't worry about what he said about you, Clara. No one who knows you will believe his ugly insinuations. Thank you, Clara said, genuinely moved by the woman's kindness, for standing up for me. All of you. Well, that's what friends do, Margaret declared, giving Eleanor Thornton a pointed look as the banker's wife passed by with obvious disapproval. Reverend Bailey joined them, his kind eyes filled with concern. Perhaps we should postpone our meeting about the ceremony, he suggested. This has been quite an ordeal. No, Clara said firmly, finding her strength returning. Victor Whitfield has disrupted enough of our day. Noah and I are getting married on the 18th, and nothing is going to prevent that. Noah's expression softened with love and pride as he looked at her. Nothing, he agreed. But as they followed Reverend Bailey toward the church, Clara couldn't quite shake the feeling that Victor Whitfield's appearance had set in motion events that might yet tear apart the happiness she and Noah had found together. The afternoon meeting at the sheriff's office was tense. Victor Whitfield produced a sworn statement from a man named Jenkins claiming to have witnessed the bank robbery from across the street. According to Jenkins, Noah had fired on Jasper before the outlaw had fully drawn his weapon, making the shot premeditated murder rather than self-defense. Jenkins was a drifter who spent 2 nights in Sweetwater, Victor explained smoothly. He had no connection to either my brother or Sullivan, making him an unbiased witness. Convenient that he's not here to be questioned, Noah observed dryly. Victor shrugged. He's a traveling man, but his statement is properly sworn and notarized. Sheriff Thornton read the document carefully, his expression giving nothing away. When he finished, he looked up at Victor with shrewd eyes. This contradicts multiple other witness statements, including my own, he said. But I can't ignore a sworn statement, no matter how suspicious the timing. He turned to Noah. I'm sorry, but I'll need to present this to the circuit judge when he comes through next week. He'll decide if there's enough to warrant a formal investigation. Noah nodded, having expected as much. I understand, Daniel. You're doing your job. What does this mean for the wedding? Clara asked, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. Nothing changes, Noah said firmly. The judge won't arrive until the 22nd days after the ceremony. And even if he decides to investigate, it would be weeks before anything comes of it. Victor Whitfield smiled thinly. So confident, Sullivan. One might almost think you believe yourself above the law. I believe in justice, Noah corrected, which is why I'm not concerned about your manufactured evidence. The two men stared at each other with barely concealed hostility. Finally, Sheriff Thornton cleared his throat. That's enough. Mr. Whitfield, I have your statement. I'll handle things from here. Noah, Clara, you're free to go. As they left the sheriff's office, Clara could feel Victor Whitfield's cold gaze following them. Outside in the privacy of their buggy, she turned to Noah with worried eyes. He won't stop, will he? Even if the judge dismisses this Jenkins person's statement, he'll find another way to cause trouble. Noah's expression was grim as he took up the reins. Probably not. Men like Victor don't let go of grudges easily. What will we do? Get married on the 18th as planned, Noah said with quiet determination. Build our life together. Deal with Victor Whitfield if and when we have to. Clara studied his profile as they drove toward Starlight. The lines of his face were set with resolve, his blue eyes clear and unflinching. This was the man she loved, steadfast, honorable, unwavering in his commitment to those he cared for. You're right, she said, finding her own resolve strengthening. We've both survived worse than Victor Whitfield. We won't let him rob us of our happiness. Noah glanced at her, a smile softening his expression. That's my Clara, always brave even when afraid. As they traveled home in the golden light of late afternoon, Clara felt a curious calm settle over her. Whatever Victor Whitfield might do, whatever challenges lay ahead, she and Noah would face them together. That certainty was worth more than all the security she had once sought in her ill-fated arrangement with Jasper. For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, Clara Bennett looked toward the future, not with fear or resignation, but with genuine hope. October 18th dawned clear and cool, the Texas sky a perfect azure dome above Starlight Ranch. Clara stood before the small mirror in what had become her room in the main house, barely recognizing the woman who looked back at her. The wedding dress was simple but elegant, cream-colored silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs ordered from a shop in San Antonio at Noah's insistence. Her chestnut hair was arranged in soft waves crowned with a circlet of small white flowers that Hannah and Margaret had helped her fashion the day before. You look beautiful, ma'am, Mrs. Torres said from the doorway, her round face beaming with approval. Like an angel. Thank you, Clara replied, smoothing the skirt nervously. Is Lily ready? See, the little one is perfect. Joe has her downstairs. Mrs. Torres crossed herself quickly. God has blessed this day, Senora. Even the weather obeys for your wedding. Clara smiled, grateful for the older woman's steadfast support. The past 3 days had been tense, with Victor Whitfield's presence in Sweetwater casting a shadow over the wedding preparations. But true to their decision, she and Noah had proceeded as planned, refusing to allow Victor's threats to derail their happiness. A soft knock at the door announced Hannah's arrival. She entered carrying a small bouquet of late wildflowers and greenery. Oh, Clara, she breathed, taking in the bride's appearance. You're radiant. Is everything ready? Clara asked, accepting the bouquet with trembling hands. Hannah nodded. The Reverend is here, the guests are seated, and your groom is pacing the parlor like a caged lion. Her eyes twinkled with amusement. Joe says if Noah wears a hole in the carpet, it's coming out of his wages. Clara laughed, feeling some of her nervousness dissipate. And is there any sign of Victor Whitfield? Hannah shook her head. Not yet, though Sheriff Thornton is here keeping an eye out. But don't worry about him today, Clara. This is your day, yours and Noah's. You're right, Clara agreed, straightening her shoulders. I'm ready. The ceremony was to take place in Starlight's parlor, which had been transformed for the occasion. Furniture had been moved aside to create an aisle, and every available surface held jars of wildflowers and candles. The hands had constructed simple benches for seating, polished to a soft gleam, and decorated with ribbon and greenery. As Clara descended the stairs on Joe's arm, the old man having proudly accepted the role of giving her away, she was overwhelmed by the sight that greeted her. The room was filled with people, not just the ranch hands, but friends from town, including Margaret and Dr. Miller, several women from the Aid Society, and even Sheriff and Mrs. Thornton, the latter looking distinctly uncomfortable, but present nonetheless. And at the end of this makeshift aisle, standing beside Reverend Bailey with Tommy at his side, was Noah. He wore a new black suit, his dark hair freshly trimmed, his beard neatly groomed. But it was his expression that caught Clara's breath, the naked adoration in his eyes as he watched her approach, as if she were the most precious sight he'd ever beheld. Lily, looking angelic in a white dress with a blue sash, sat contentedly on Mrs. Torres's lap in the front row, clutching the wooden horse Noah had carved for her. When she spotted her mother, she let out a delighted squeal that drew affectionate laughter from the guests. The ceremony itself was simple and heartfelt. Reverend Bailey spoke of love's resilience, of second chances, of the courage it takes to open one's heart after loss. Clara and Noah exchanged vows in clear, steady voices, promising to cherish and support each other through whatever life might bring. As Noah slipped a gold band onto Clara's finger, his mother's ring, Joe had told her privately, she felt tears of joy well in her eyes. This moment, this commitment, represented everything she had once thought forever was beyond her reach: love, respect, family belonging. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Bailey declared with evident pleasure. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Noah kissed her, then a tender, reverent kiss that sealed their union and brought approving murmurs from the gathered guests. When they turned to face the room as Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, the applause was immediate and heartfelt. The celebration that followed was jubilant, with music provided by two of the hands who played fiddle and harmonica, abundant food prepared by Mrs. Torres and Margaret Miller, and enough goodwill to banish any lingering shadows from Victor Whitfield's threats. As dusk fell, lanterns were lit in the yard, and the party moved outdoors for dancing. Noah led Clara in the first dance, his movements surprisingly graceful despite his recent injuries. "Happy, Mrs. Sullivan?" he asked, his voice low and intimate as they moved together. "Completely," Clara replied, her heart too full for more elaborate declarations. "Even with all the complications." Noah glanced meaningfully toward Sheriff Thornton, who maintained his vigilant watch from the edge of the gathering. Clara followed his gaze, then looked back at her husband, with steady conviction. "Even with all the complications, they're part of our story, Noah. Part of what brought us together." He smiled, drawing her closer as the music slowed. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise," she teased. "You're just finally noticing." Their laughter mingled in the cooling evening air, a joyful sound that seemed to embody the hope they had found in each other. The party continued into the night with toasts and stories and more dancing. Joe Parker, slightly tipsy on the special whiskey Noah had provided for the occasion, regaled the guests with tales of Noah as a young man, while Tommy blushed furiously when asked to dance by one of the young women from town. Clara was taking a moment's rest, watching Lily being passed from admirer to admirer among the guests when Sheriff Thornton approached her. "Mrs. Sullivan," he greeted her, tipping his hat. "Congratulations. It was a beautiful ceremony." "Thank you, Sheriff," Clara replied. "And thank you for coming, both of you." She nodded toward Eleanor, who was engaged in stilted conversation with Margaret Miller nearby. Daniel smiled ruefully. "Eleanor may not approve of everything, but she respects Noah. Always has." He hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "I should inform you that Victor Whitfield was seen boarding the eastbound train this afternoon." Clara's eyebrows rose in surprise. "He's left Sweetwater without waiting for the judge." "So it appears," the sheriff confirmed, "though I doubt we've heard the last of him. Men like that tend to resurface when least expected." "Thank you for telling me," Clara said. "I'll let Noah know later. No need to disturb the celebration with such news." Daniel nodded approvingly. "You're good for him, you know. He was half dead and bonded after Rachel, just going through the motions of living. You and the little one brought him back." Before Clara could respond to this unexpected confidence, Noah appeared at her side, sliding an arm around her waist. "Are you monopolizing my wife, Daniel?" he asked good-naturedly. "Just offering my congratulations," the sheriff replied with a smile. "And now I'll leave you to your guests. It's getting late for an old man like me." As Daniel moved away to collect Eleanor, Noah looked questioningly at Clara. Everything all right? Perfect, she assured him, deciding the news about Victor could wait until tomorrow. Absolutely perfect. Later that night, after the guests had departed and Lily slept soundly in her new room down the hall, Clara stood by the bedroom window gazing out at the star-filled Texas sky. Noah's arms encircled her from behind his chin, resting gently on her head. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. "About stars," Clara replied. "About how they guide travelers home." Noah's arms tightened slightly around her, like my father used to say, God's map in the heavens. "Yes." Clara turned in his embrace to face him. "I was lost for so long, Noah. Wandering without direction after Thomas died, after Philadelphia became impossible. Even when I boarded that train to Texas, I had no idea where I was really going." "And now," Noah asked, his eyes reflecting the starlight. Clara smiled, her heart full to bursting with love and gratitude. "Now I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. Home." Noah lowered his head to kiss her, a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. The challenges they would face, the joys they would share, the family they would build at Starlight Ranch beneath the vast Texas sky and its eternal guiding stars. 5 years later, Clara Sullivan stood on the porch of Starlight Ranch watching as a wagon approached along the dusty road from Sweetwater. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the land, gilding the familiar landscape in shades of gold and amber. At 6 years old, Lily was now a confident, spirited child, with her mother's chestnut hair and a smile that could charm even the most hardened cowhand. She sat on the porch steps, teaching her 3-year-old brother Thomas to play cat's cradle with a length of string. "Mama, look," Lily called excitedly, pointing toward the approaching wagon. "Is that Aunt Hannah?" Clara shaded her eyes against the sun. "Yes, sweetheart, and it looks like she's brought someone with her." The past 5 years had brought many changes to Starlight Ranch. Noah had expanded their holdings, adding the adjacent property when Old Man Jenkins decided to retire to San Antonio. The main house had grown as well, with a new wing to accommodate their growing family. Thomas had been born 2 years after their wedding, and Clara now carried their second child due in the winter. Victor Whitfield had indeed resurfaced, as Sheriff Thornton predicted. The circuit judge had dismissed his witness statement as insufficient evidence, but Victor had persisted, filing civil suits and continuing his campaign to discredit Noah. The legal battles had been costly and draining, but they had ultimately prevailed when Victor's witness was proven to have been paid for his testimony. Eleanor Thornton had never fully accepted Clara into Sweetwater society, but most of the town had embraced the Sullivans, especially after they opened part of their land as a refuge for widows and children in need. A project inspired by Clara's own experience and funded in part by the surprising inheritance she had received when James Bennett died, leaving her a portion of his estate in a belated attempt at amends. The sound of the wagon drawing closer pulled Clara from her reflections. Noah emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth as he came to join his family on the porch. "Hannah's early," he commented, dropping a kiss on Clara's cheek before ruffling Thomas's dark hair affectionately. "Meeting's not until tomorrow." "Perhaps she has news that couldn't wait," Clara suggested. As the wagon reached the house, they could see that Hannah's companion was a young woman, perhaps 20, with a small child clutched tightly in her arms. The woman's face was pale and anxious, her clothing travel-stained, but of good quality. "Clara, Noah," Hannah called as she halted the wagon. "I've brought someone who needs your help." Noah stepped forward to assist the young woman down from the wagon, while Hannah climbed down on the other side. Up close, Clara could see that the woman's face bore the fading marks of bruises, and her eyes held the haunted look of someone who had endured more than any person should have to bear. "This is Rebecca Miller," Hannah explained quietly. "No relation to Margaret. She's come from Kansas City in difficult circumstances." Clara immediately understood. She approached the young woman with a gentle smile. "Welcome to Starlight, Rebecca. You and your child are safe here." Rebecca looked at her with wary hope. "Mrs. Wilson said you might, that is, that you help women who—" She trailed off, unable to articulate her situation. "Women who need a fresh start," Noah supplied kindly. "We do. No questions asked." The young woman's eyes filled with tears. "My husband, he said no one would believe me, that no decent people would take in a woman who ran from her marriage." Clara exchanged a glance with Noah, their understanding perfect after 5 years of partnership. "Your husband was wrong," she said firmly. There are many decent people in this world, Rebecca. People who understand that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is to leave a situation that isn't right. Come inside, Noah added. You must be tired from your journey. We have a cabin prepared for guests like yourself. It's small but clean and private. As they guided Rebecca and her child toward the house, Lily approached curiously. Mama is the lady going to stay with us. Yes, sweetheart, Clara answered. She and her little one need our help for a while. Lily nodded with the solemn understanding of a child who had grown up witnessing her parents' commitment to helping others. Like you needed help when you came to Texas. Clara smiled, touching her daughter's cheek affectionately. Exactly like that. Later, after Rebecca had been settled in the guest cabin with food and clean clothing, Clara and Noah sat on their porch in the gathering twilight. Hannah had stayed for dinner, bringing news from town and updates on the Ladies' Aid Society, which Clara still attended when her duties at Starlight allowed. Another lost soul finds her way to us, Noah observed, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Clara leaned against his shoulder, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her pregnancy. Not lost anymore, she corrected, just following a different path than she expected. Noah smiled, wrapping his arm around her. Like someone else I know. They sat in companionable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, distant lowing of cattle, the soft conversation of the hands in the bunkhouse, Lily's voice reading a story to Thomas in the parlor behind them. I never imagined this life, Clara admitted quietly. When I stepped off that train in Sweetwater alone, and afraid I couldn't have dreamed of all we've built together. Nor I, Noah agreed. After Rachel died, I thought that part of me was finished, that I'd live out my days alone with my grief and my work. He kissed her temple gently. Thank God I was wrong. Clara smiled, remembering their conversation on this very porch years ago, when Noah had pointed out the North Star to her and spoken of his father's belief in God's map written in the heavens. Your father was right, you know, she said, gazing up at the star-filled sky. There are guiding stars in our lives, people, moments, choices that lead us home, even when we think we're lost forever. Noah followed her gaze upward, his expression reflective. And sometimes the storms that seem to destroy our path are actually clearing the way for something better. Clara turned to look at him, this man who had rescued her when she needed it most, who had become her partner, her lover, her best friend. I love you, Noah Sullivan, she said simply, more with each passing day. And I love you, Clara Sullivan, he replied, his voice rich with emotion. You and our children are the stars that guide me home. As they sat together beneath the vast Texas sky, surrounded by the life they had built from the ashes of their separate griefs, Clara felt a profound sense of gratitude. Their journey hadn't been easy, with its storms and floods, its threats and challenges. But every difficult step had led them here to this moment of perfect contentment, to the knowledge that whatever the future might hold, they would face it together, guided by the unwavering light of love and the stars above Starlight Ranch. The end.